idea that the brain is a computer and neurons are dumb on us, which is ridiculous, despite all the billions and trillions. And don't believe the hype because, AI does great things, so I'm not trashing AI.
Okay, guys, welcome back to the Grimerica show. We are going to be chatting with Stuart Hameroff a little bit later. It's a fun one, good one. Stuart's a mind blower. Pretty much a lecture. We don't get a lot of talking in, but those are usually the ones you guys like the best anyway.
Yeah, true that.
Yeah, so it's a good one. And we'll do a little intro here first with the one and only Graham. I'm addicted to podcasting Dunlop.
No, I'm not.
No?
No. I still have a hard time doing it sometimes. Yeah.
Gotta get up for it.
Gotta get up for it. It's harder the day at work sometimes, and I'm like, oh man, why are some of the most stressful days the day that you have to sort of snap out of it and start podcasting?
Yeah, I don't mind that so much. For me, it's more in the morning when I first get out of bed. Because I'm always super tired. I never want to get out of bed. I just don't like to want to get out of bed. I'm the type of person that I just like to get up on my own terms, which is really only about an hour later than I get up.
Yeah, I agree, yeah.
And I just wake up and I would be so much better.
Yeah. It'd be nice if you had a job that could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't. So I have to get up before.
Yeah.
And I don't enjoy it.
But I go through periods when I'm not podcasting where I really enjoy it. Like I enjoy the thought of podcasting and, chatting with these interesting people, but
that's
sometimes when it comes time to that day, it's like
I'll be up late tonight. We'll be up till fucking 11 or 12, it's just like, but then by the end of the workday, I'm excited for it.
Yeah. And it's chatting with people like, Stuart Hameroff here that make it all worth it. And of course our listeners and the feedback we get from friends of the show and stuff. Because Stuart's great. I remember him from like 10, 15 years ago on that movie, What the Bleep, and I've always wanted to chat with him. So, yeah, it's great. It
was a gooder.
Yeah. So we ramble on here for a little bit, about usually about half hour, 45 minutes. There's a note in the show notes that says the timestamp to the interview if you need to skip forward. And also there's a fast forward button, I think, that skips you to the next chapter. Are you still doing the next chapter thing, Darren?
Yes.
If you don't want to listen to this rambling, you can go straight to the interview. And it's a pretty long one. I think it's almost 2 hours, I think.
This one?
I think so.
Yeah, about that. I had a couple long ones lately, the last two episodes. The Nancy Euro one was kind of short,
Yeah.
But we bounced back with almost 3 hours.
Yeah. So I got some feedback to read, and I thought I'd try and keep it a little bit close to our topic of quantum consciousness with Stuart.
What sort of feedback? Jingle-worthy feedback?
Well, I have like some dreams and synchronicities, but stuff that kind of show that we're not just our brain's not just a computer, Kind of goes over and above.
We don't have a jingle for that.
Well, you can choose dreams or synchro.
The researcher believes that this neurosynchronicity occurs when the brains of musicians playing together create a neurological meta-network. According to her, the phenomenon can be described as a kind of communal brain.
Oh, I love that.
There you go.
How come we haven't heard that one in so long?
It's on board too.
It's on what?
It's on board too.
What is that?
I really need a better soundboard app. I'm really not super thrilled with the one I've got sometimes. But that's a pootie pie.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
That's really good.
So spit it out.
So what do I have, a synchronicity then?
I don't know. You tell me.
Let's see here. Okay, so here's I got a couple tiny ones here. This is Caleb, a fan of the show, following you on Instagram. Maybe a synchro. I have a little story for you. It was Saturday around 7:30. My head was tired from the weekend. Normally I'm a late night person. Tonight was different. Sleep seemed to call to me. I think I read this already. You might have to edit this out. I let it take me over, instantly fell into vivid dreams. I woke back up around 11 p.m. thinking to myself, apparently I'm going to dream tonight. Since I have a strong ability to control my dreams, and this night seemed to be a dreaming night, I focused my thoughts towards a message. I wanted to learn something tonight. instead of just playing around with no purpose in the dream realm. With that thought in mind, I fell back to the place. This time the storyline was different. I was sucked back into old mindsets and mentalities. The storyline was me being back out fishing again, which I very did so much enjoy. No, what did he say? Which I very much so did not enjoy in reality or in dream.
Fishing?
Yeah.
I like fishing. Fuck! That reminds me. I keep forgetting to sign up for the walleye draw.
Trying not to swear loudly like that. There's a walleye draw in Northern Ontario?
They're opening up 12 lakes in Alberta.
Oh, wow.
For walleye fishing.
Oh, wow.
But it's all by lottery.
Really?
So I need to try and get in there. So I need somebody somebody tech savvy to tell me how to make a bot army.
So you can go fishing for walleye?
Yeah.
In Alberta, the many lakes.
Yeah, I mean, that'll be
Where's the nearest lake here? I mean, we're not even.
You commute.
Besides your little man-made
You drive
lake.
all over the fucking countryside pissing in bottles for less, okay?
Okay, go do your fishing.
But I could use a bot army for all sorts of things besides fishing.
You don't want a bot. I don't agree with that. I think that's terrible. Like all these mainstream news organizations with bots and people like.
No, those are fake followers. Those aren't bot armies. Bot armies you use to fuck shit up. You could send your bot army after CNN and crash their website. That's the kind of bot army I want. But I don't know how to make it. But I'd like someone to make it for me and just give me control of it.
Can we talk about that on a different episode besides the one with Stuart Hameroff?
Stuart would probably not approve of the bot army.
Let's get back to the dream. So the overwhelming feeling of being trapped at sea filled my whole mental state. I was there again, nowhere to go. Only 4 inches of fiberglass separated me from the ocean. Like a bad trip, I couldn't get out, and my mental state would only repeat and repeat. The slight sensation of knowing it was just a dream kept me from being too overwhelmed with reliving the experience. Then I woke up to my alarm clock for work. It was over. For me, dreams like that will linger with me for a couple hours. The feeling was still with me at work. Even while I stared at the foreman, somehow, it didn't even feel real. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a friend offering me a job on a boat this coming summer. I haven't heard from him in a couple months because he's out fishing. I hadn't previously considered fishing this summer, even thought about it at all. Hopefully this will make some sense to you in some crazy way. Thought it was pretty crazy coincidence, maybe a synchro. I'm a big fan of your show, guys. Thanks for everything you do and the knowledge you spread. P.S. I found you on Spotify. I live in Alaska, so we're like neighbors.
Word up. I wonder if he's talking about, like, commercial fishing.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, it's probably different.
Yeah.
It's probably not as fun just netting fish out of the ocean.
Yeah.
Catching them.
Thanks, Caleb.
Yeah. There's at least 2 Calebs that listen to the show.
Yeah.
Actually, we don't know that Caleb Hanks listens.
No, we don't know.
Probably doesn't. Caleb, if you listen, you better let me know.
Oh, here's another good one. I think this is from a local guy.
Local guy?
Yeah. Synchrotastic.
Synchrotastic?
Yeah.
Wow.
I thought I'd share this one.
You know this is his favorite jingle.
I'm a rambling grand.
It's everybody's.
Synchronicities all over the web.
Actually, I'm not 100% sure. It'd be interesting to know everyone's favorite jingle because it seems to be between that one, social media jangle, and Graham is an all-in believer in chemtrails.
Yeah, of course. And most of these jingles are done by listeners of the show.
The only one that's been turned into a ringtone is a chemtrail one, and it's happened 4 times.
Wow. You have to show me how to do that. Maybe I'll put it on mine.
I don't know how to do it. I just send people the MP3.
Really? You do?
Well, I'm sure I could figure it out.
No, but you do send people the audio from it? Okay. So,
yeah, if anyone wants a jingle, they just ask me. I'll send it to them. Yeah, absolutely. Especially if it's that one. I think it's a great ringtone.
So he says, hey man, thought I'd share this one. It's pretty neat. I was having a conversation this afternoon about the relevance of the trinities and threes throughout religion and different belief systems, where in the course of the conversation, an idea I was familiar with hit me with total clarity. The way that you the way that things do when you suddenly take an old idea and it takes on a whole other level of meaning and application in life. 3 is the smallest number of points required. When you connect them, you create something. In the case of 2 dimensions, a triangle is the first shape that creates an observable space on the page, for example. All this linked back to metaphysics and traditions and how we actually create reality all the time. But the context on that discussion totally gelled an idea inside me in a way that I had never done before. I'm not sure if it's being explained clearly here. It's most likely not, but that hardly matters. It's not the point of this email. Here's the synchro. I listen to podcasts in a sort of as-they-come schedule because I'm subscribed to a few regular shows, none of which are anything like yours, you know. I think he's being sarcastic there. So one will just run into the next one, and I don't really fuss about which one comes next. I just try to stay up to date with them. Anyway, I left that conversation and got in my truck and hit play for the podcast player for my drive home. And what episode should come on?
What is this, a fucking guessing game?
I was, hoping that you were paying attention enough to guess. That's right, the one about the power of shapes. Specifically,
I would have never guessed that.
Specifically, starting off with an explanation of triangles. Bam! Not exactly a mind bender, but definitely worth sharing. Have a rad week, you guys.
Rad. I like the rad.
I love that.
I
love that. Imagine that.
It's weird that, and then you get,
boom.
Didn't we just get, because we never get cash donations. And you randomly got 2 cards to the P.O. box in the last week with $33.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to thank the 2 listeners who supported with $33 of U.S. cash donations
and that's like
that arrived at the same time.
That's like 1 out of 5 cash donations you've got in 4 years?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. Maybe a couple more. I'm not sure exactly.
That's weird.
Not a lot, though, but yeah, that's pretty crazy.
Huh.
It reminds me of the one, do you remember my big synchro about the Hawks way back a couple of years ago?
Mike Hawk, that
one?
Yeah.
And how I got from, I was looking at the researcher, oh man, I'm going to forget his name.
Jordan Hawk or something Hawk?
12 Hawk? Jonathan Hawk.
Yeah.
And then I got into my car and I was listening to this long audiobook.
Yeah, and then you drove your bike past the Hawk and it looked you in the eye.
That was all before
that. You guys shared a moment.
See, you remember the details of my
memory is phenomenal.
Anyways, when I got in the car,
if you can get past the first
the short term,
the first 36 hours, you're gold.
Yeah. Anyways, I turned on the audiobooks right smack in the middle, and it says researcher Jonathan Hawk, that was the first it was ever mentioned.
If they want to hear the synchro a little more, you can go back to the Len Caston episode.
No, it wasn't that one.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah.
No.
I think so. Keep
I
talking.
don't know. Anyways, that's it, man. That's it for that one.
That's it?
Yeah.
I'm not really super... Oh, yeah, here we go. When did we interview Len Caston? Shit, that was a long time ago. Was that before we numbered him?
That was before the igloo. That was when we were in your basement.
This house? Yeah.
Yeah.
For some reason, I was on the wrong side of the table at that time, too, right? Oh, those are the Producer Joe days.
Yeah.
I don't even think Producer Joe even listens to the show anymore. Randall Carlson, Robert Wagner, Rick Strassman, Dan Carlin. Hey, when is the next, does Renee still listen to the show? When's the next One Great Year coming out?
I'm not sure.
Dave McGowan, the late Dave McGowan. Old Gallenberger. Wow, I'm going back there. Len Caston, June 7th, 2014.
I mentioned Gallenberger to somebody in the chat room. Oh, which did we talk about the chat?
No.
No, we didn't.
In about, then the power go out, and I'll be ready for a couple of months.
Brisebois.
Yeah, Brisebois, so that's good news.
Don't flip through all that.
We're just on scare away.
Okay, so I'm riding my bike. This is how it starts. I'm riding my bike past Nose Hill Park. It's
Okay.
That's
You don't want me to replay the synchro?
Pathway along the side of it.
What is that music playing?
There's a metal railing there. So I'm riding up, and ahead I see this big bird on the standing. Okay.
No. We need the recap.
And I thought it was an owl at first. No, it's not an owl. It kind of looks like a golden eagle, or it's. As I got closer, it was definitely a raptor type bird.
No, I can't handle it anymore. I can't listen to my own synchro on my own show.
And it's like right on the.
I want you to rate it.
Quietly riding up to it, and I'm thinking.
No, come on. It goes on for a while. I can't do it. What episode is it though? I'll link to it in the show notes.
Grimerica talks to Len Caston.
Really? How did you even remember that?
I told you I have a phenomenal memory.
You don't have to listen to the Len Caston part of it.
Whoa, bro. This one doesn't even go all the way down to half speed.
Just or thinking to it, kind of. Don't be scared.
Okay, come on.
I'm just going to ride by. So
trying to telepathically communicate with her.
Are you on half speed?
It's just a natural thing. Like, don't be scared. Like you would say.
Maybe it is a natural thing.
That's on 3/4 speed, yeah.
And whatever you do out there, don't play it on anything less than 1.
What about more? Can I play it on more?
Maybe. So anyways, I ride by it and I look at it, and it's looking at me from like a foot or two away in the eyes as I ride by it, and I just get this full like body shiver, like whoosh. And of course I wanted to stop and look at it or do something, but I just kept riding, right? Because it's just watched me drive right by it. So I didn't even know what kind of bird this was, right? I tried to get it.
Continue.
Okay, I'll try and get myself together here.
I whipped that up pretty quick, actually.
That was good, yeah. That was good.
Now people assume the show is scripted and we have ads and it's all native ads.
Native ads?
Selling squatty potties.
Yeah.
You know what? I found out that people do actually sell squatty potties on podcasts.
Really?
So turns out the accusation was
people?
Turns out the accusation was valid.
Because I don't feel like my squatty
potties
are
9-inch.
Doing that.
You gotta get the 9-inch. I'll take your 7-inch for my other toilet.
Okay. Now you buy me a 9-inch then and I'll trade you.
Yeah.
I'm not finding the squatty potty working very well.
Throw a couple books under it, get it up to 9 inches, and see what happens.
No, I don't want to put books on the bathroom floor.
Well, get it up to 9 inches and see if that's the problem.
I don't feel like stacking anything on the washroom floor, really.
What are you, fucking Seinfeld?
Okay, let's move on. It's degrading fast.
The wheels are coming off.
So, do you want a dream prediction? Another dream prediction one?
Yes.
Okay. This is from Selena.
Oops. Whoa. That wasn't the one. Did I accidentally? No.
Is it real or a dream? What does that even mean?
This is one of these crazy ones that, some people just
Did you know Harold
predict really detailed dreams?
To delete the backup of the show if I didn't start being nicer to you?
Thanks, Harold. So, To Grimerica found your show by searching Ancient Aliens about 3 or 4 months ago on SoundCloud. Actually, I do want to mention...
Someone found us on fucking SoundCloud?
Yeah.
You're not still paying for that, are you?
I am still paying for it, yeah. It comes out of our monthly... Well, it comes out of my...
Is that still adding in the bill that the show owes you? Just delete it.
No, Selena found us on SoundCloud.
I don't think I even put this stuff on there anymore.
You better. Yeah, you should. It's still there. Okay, we'll look
Remind
into
me
that.
to look at.
Okay,
what
we'll
show episode is she talking about?
I don't know.
Newer one?
We'll find out here. Anyways, it is good to hear how people found us. There's people finding us on Spotify and SoundCloud and stuff. It's pretty cool to know.
It's good. It's weird to know how do people find you on SoundCloud? She's just like tiptoed into a whole world of podcasts that she clearly did not know about before.
Maybe not.
Go into iTunes and make that same search.
So she says, having been missing that show, I think they had it pulled from the History Channel, and I used to watch it on, or the Alien Con that they had
was last for them, not sure. Almost through all your episodes. Don't know what I'm going to do when I run out. Have gotten 4 others so far. Hooked on your show, too. Anyways, love your show.
So depending on where she's listening to the show, there might be way more episodes than she thinks.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So try like iTunes or YouTube.
I'm going to check right
or
now.
The website even. So in the middle, I'll keep going on here. So your voices definitely don't seem to match what I'd pictured, but to get to the point, I've had some lucid dreams that seem to be much more than dreams.
Well, look, they're all here.
Oh, yeah? Okay, good.
2 plays, 6 plays, 16.
Okay. In fact, there have been so many actual predictions from these dreams that I've started to write them down, and now I have a couple notepads full of them. So get this. For several years, I've thought it's been the spirits that have been visiting me or spirit guides, but I'm unsure. I've been told about pregnancies and roundabout ways of deaths that have always been true. Don't want to make this too long, so I'll tell you about one that really stood out for me. I have a sort of distant type grandmother on my aunt's side by marriage. She had a boyfriend for many years. I didn't really know him, and about 2 years ago, he passed. When he did, about 3 days after his passing, I had the most vivid, detailed dream ever about him. He showed me the inside of his church, that the church was in his backyard in the dream, where he wanted to be buried. Then he showed me where he lived, the furniture he had in his house, where he kept pictures of his grandkids, and it was a pic of all of them sitting on the floor looking up at the camera, the TV, a wooden one that sat on the floor like the ones they had back in the 80s, even showed me his favorite channel. It was some sort of QVC type channel you buy stuff from. I remember it plain as day. It was situated that when you walked in the front door, there was a small hallway, then to your left was a brown couch on the right. Of the brown couch was a TV, and to the left was a china hutch with knickknacks, and a little further to the left was another part of the couch and a small window that let in sunlight. There was a young, energetic teen, maybe 16 or 17, with super curly blonde hair, giggling and sitting on the couch, and said, "Oh, you know, Dad, he always keeps $500 in his lunchbox." I have never in my life been to his home. When I brought this dream to Grandma, she confirmed every bit of it. Even had an idea as to who the teen was in the dream. The only part was the dollars in the vault, not a lunchbox. This is just one of so many. What do you guys think? But do love your show and plan on telling many more friends about it, as well as sending a donation. Would be awesome to see you guys on a live podcast. Let me know when you come to Washington. That would be lots of fun to hang out. Sincerely, Selena.
We're in Washington.
Oh, I don't know if that's that Washington, maybe.
DC?
Anyways, what do you think about the dream predictions? The notebook's full of them. Actually, I think that her writing them down helps her remember them as well.
Yeah, guaranteed. Yeah, Lisa was trying to write some down. She had a journal beside the bed.
It's hard.
Yeah.
I tell you, best with voice notes.
Sure. Yeah, it's weird how dreams tend to do that. They tend to do that.
But some people tend to be so much better at it than others.
I wonder if she could have been a baby then.
What does that mean?
That she was a baby. That was a baby memory.
Well, she's never been there.
Unless she went there when she was a baby.
Or
never. If it's never, then it's weirder.
Yeah, definitely.
But
it was a few days after he passed, too, so that's interesting how maybe he
dropped off some. Yeah, that could have been it, for sure. It's all one, baby.
Oh, I've been thinking about this theory, too. I had one in the steam room the other day.
On mushrooms?
No, just in the steam room, like after a workout. And I was thinking about, I don't know if I even want to talk about it on this yet. It's not really fully formulated.
Oh boy.
But you know how when we talked to Stuart about his theory about, or not his theory, but about how life could survive after death by the quantum coherence of the entangled particles, like basically the microtubules being entangled. And I thought, what if it's not all or nothing? What if you could be consciously or subconsciously entangling your particles are making them more coherent so that when you do die, that energy stays together and it can go into another life with the memories, the past life memories. But what if you don't entangle them? Like, what if you're just distracted and you're not meditating, you're not like actually trying to build coherence in your quantum soul, let's say, that some of those particles don't make it. Like, it's not a fully entangled soul, do you know what I mean?
So then you just reincarnate as a douchebag?
Well, then you don't have that full, like maybe the goal is to...
There's an awful lot of douchebags.
Maybe the goal is to cohere and entangle as much as you can so that you keep remembering more and more, and you build up that spiritual, like, sort of like a level.
Do you really want to remember the last life?
Level up.
You want to start again and remember the shit?
Yeah, I would.
You would.
Yeah, anyways, let's move on. I kind of wanted to write all that down before sharing it.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. All right, so I do want to mention the announcement, the Penrose Institute announcement that Stuart emailed me right afterwards. So I want to read it here.
Sure.
Do you want me to do that now?
You may as well.
So this is the Roger Penrose Institute is to form in San Diego, and it'll examine the interplay between quantum mechanics and general relativity with implications for AI and understanding of consciousness. So a unique institute is being formed to develop and investigate the forward-thinking ideas of eminent British physicist Sir Roger Penrose. To be based in San Diego, with collaborations in London and Oxford and Tucson, Arizona, the Institute will examine the interplay between quantum mechanics and general relativity. And I just said all that. The fundamental difference between artificial and human intelligence, how humans should best work with AI, insights on the nature of consciousness, new approaches to treatment of mental and cognitive disorders, a novel type of telescope to image dark matter and the distant universe, a sensor to discover natural resources and dangers in the Earth's crust, and a resolution of the Schrodinger's cat paradox. Sir Roger's ideas on the importance of quantum effects in human consciousness were intriguing and inspirational when first described 30 years ago now, but they drew skeptical criticism, particularly to the suggestion that exotic/functional quantum effects could be present in living tissue at warm temperatures. However, new discoveries in biology show that exotic functional quantum effects are present in living systems. For example, photosynthesis in plants and potentially some forms of bird navigation depend on them. Also, recent developments allow us to probe neurons at scales that might reveal quantum behavior and to produce sensors capable of measuring the interplay between quantum and relativistic effects. As a result, a group of scientists, entrepreneurs, and philanthropists are joining forces with Sir Roger to develop and experimentally test these theories in a new institute. Practical experiments are planned which should lead to the development of biomedical technologies to study deeper level quantum vibrational processes inside neurons, to improve understanding of brain functions and treatment of brain disorders. Computational technologies to better allow computers and humans to work together. Sensor technologies to detect subtle gravitational effects to peer into the Earth, detecting natural resource, the inner Earth. I'm just kidding. You got that. And providing early warning of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Or out into space to give a picture of the early universe and distribution of dark matter. That's interesting, eh? I'll have to keep an eye on that guy, on that one.
For shizzle.
So a link to that will be in the show notes.
Speaking of show notes, do all the other stuff in the show notes too while you're there. Mainly check out grimerica.ca/support and sign up for a monthly subscription if you can. Those really are the easiest to work with, for sure. If you can't afford that, maybe you can do a one-time donation. But there are options there anywhere from $1 a month to right up to $30 a month. I think we've got someone at just about every level.
We got the chat room too now. Did we mention that? We were going to.
Grimerica.ca/hangout to get in the chat. I think there's already like 100 people in there.
Yeah, it's just a perpetual group chat. That's kind of interesting. There's been some really funny stuff in there so far.
It's like basically now anytime you pop in there, except for the chat seems to shut down from about
it varies.
About 2 a.m. till about after I go to bed and before I wake up, it seems to be going. Which is cool. Right now let's see, James Cruz, Grim Steak are having a conversation about poltergeist. What else we got here? It looks like Scott.
Yeah, that's been fun.
These guys are like best friends in there.
Yeah.
It's awesome. It's fun because we can pop in there from time to time and interact with you guys on kind of a way more casual level. I've been posting random pictures from my phone every day.
Yeah. And it helps when you guys give us feedback too and review the show on iTunes for sure.
Yeah.
Tell us how you found us. And tell some friends.
Yeah.
And don't forget the UFO quote. I got it open here ready to go.
You do?
Yeah.
So check out the Hangout. Check out Grimerica.ca/support, guys. Sign up for a monthly. Do a one-time donation. Big thanks to those of you who do. Still got zero feedback on anyone that wants us to do anything about it. So, did you get any feedback on that? About how we could honor our subscribers?
Yeah, they said that we shouldn't say them by name. I had feedback from somebody that said that.
I don't think we ever do say them by name, do we?
No, but did you remember we asked for feedback and she's giving us, or he or whoever it is.
Don't say her.
They are giving us feedback.
Z?
They.
Singular?
Sure.
Okay. See, now it's confusing. I don't know what they means.
I know. Well, that's why I said
it. There's the paper. Yeah, so we'll figure something out, or we won't, or whatever. Anyway, check it out. Check out Grimerica.ca/news. Sign up for the newsletter. You do get that. You don't get it instantly, Justin. We'll send it to you within a couple of days after you sign up for the newsletter. Grimerica.ca/news. Of course, the cabin debacle episode is on there. And, I think that's it, right?
Yeah.
Leave a review, blah, 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 all that jazz.
Down and Graham, we're going deep.
We don't want to have to ask you guys to do this, but we need to ask you guys to do this.
About the
stuff,
donations?
the donations and the
reviews.
We have to.
We don't have ads, and we sunk quite a bit into this, so yeah.
It's a profound UFO quote of the week.
Now it's going to stick in everybody's head. So this is, I know I'm not crazy. I've always said I didn't believe in this stuff. I don't know what I saw, but I know I saw something. It's just hard to describe what happened. It looked like an evening star or something, but it kept getting bigger and brighter. I heard a whirring noise like a blender, like it was straining when you first put ice in it. And then the UFO started coming closer. The thing came right over the car. It came right to us, like it was being piloted. The thing just hovered over us about 20 to 30 feet up for more than a minute. There was light coming out from the little windows, and the light changed colors several times, from soft blue to red to green and other colors. It didn't spin or anything. It just hovered around there. Then the thing just picked up and took off, northwest, toward Satarsha. And that quote was from Madison County Sheriff's Deputy Kenneth Creel, Flora, Mississippi, United States, February 10th, 1977, and the object was also witnessed by Highway Patrolman Louis Younger.
There you have it.
Yep, that was a good one.
No, my SSIPPI.
Yep.
Right on.
Right on, buddy.
Is that it?
Yep.
That's it?
That's it.
All right, guys. Enjoy the chat with Stuart. I think you will. Do all the stuff in the show notes. And, enjoy Stuart. He was a great one. What was that documentary he was on way back in the day? What the Bleep Do We Know?
Yeah.
I remember watching that shit way back in the day. It was kind of a game changer.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Enjoy.
have Dr. Stuart Hameroff here today. He's the director of Center for Consciousness Studies, Professor Emeritus, Department of Anesthesiology, the College of Medicine at the University of Arizona, Department of Psychology. And he's a quantum consciousness theorist and researcher. I first found out about his work in the movie What the Bleep, and sort of been wanting to chat with him ever since. And it's really good to have you on. Thanks for coming on, Stuart.
My pleasure, Graham. Nice to hear from you guys.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, honestly, I don't know. I don't know where to start because there's so much to talk about. I was reading up on your research and some of your blogs, and I always feel like I want to start with like what's new, but a lot of times people are used to sort of going back and giving a bit of a history on your research. So, do you feel like going back, or do you want to just jump into some of the new stuff?
Let me just wing it. How I got interested and how I got to where I am.
Let's do that.
Well, first of all, let me just say that most people look at consciousness as a computation. They look at the brain as a computer.
Yeah.
And the brain is made of 86 billion neurons that are connected by thousands of synapses, each having thousands of synapses, making kind of a network that's adaptable and changeable. The synapses can change plasticity. And so the network can change configuration, and information flows through this network, and somehow consciousness happens.
Right.
So the assumption has always been that the brain is a computer, and the neurons are just like simple bits, on-off switches. They're actually integrate and fire threshold logic devices, a little bit more complicated. Hudson neuron. But basically a computer. And ignoring, that neurons are alive, and we don't really know what that means yet. And accordingly, this general idea that which is not my idea, the mainstream idea that the brain is a computer, jives with artificial intelligence ideas who are trying to build computers that act like brains, that have intelligence and maybe even consciousness, although they won't exactly say why it would be conscious. So the brain-mind-computer comparison is very popular, and there's led to things like the singularity, which says that you have roughly 100 billion neurons with 1,000 synapses, switching 100 times a second gives you 10 to the 16th operations per second. And that when we have computers that will do 10 to the 16th operations per second, we'll have brain equivalents and therefore consciousness. So just give us another couple billion or 10 billion, and we'll have it for you. And they keep pushing the goalpost for that because nothing's happened. In fact, rather than wait for 86 billion neurons, the Human Brain Project, like Henry Markram in Switzerland was doing, then Christoph Koch has a more modest mouse cortex, which only has 20 billion. I forget exactly. Some people said, hey, wait a second. We have this worm. We have this worm called C. elegans, flatworm. It swims around. It does all kinds of stuff. And about 15 years ago, the entire nervous system of the worm was mapped. So we already know every neuron and every synapse, and I think even every ion channel in the nervous system, brain, if you will, of this worm, which is no genius, but can swim around and do functional things and find a mate and find food and avoid predators and so forth. Yeah. And, let's start with that. So they started this project mapping it's called Open Worm. They got online and got people around the world simulating this nervous system. And we're going to announce the day where we're going to have a simulated worm, and they were going to press a button, and it would go swimming around and look like a worm. And that day came and went, and nothing happened. And it turns out, reading between the lines mostly, that it's been a big flop. The simulated worm, despite the fact that every neuron, the synapse is simulated, doesn't do anything. There's no behavior, suggesting there's something missing in this idea. And that's the key point I want to make. The idea that the brain is a computer and neurons are dumb on us, which is ridiculous, despite all the billions and trillions. And don't believe the hype because, AI does great things, so I'm not trashing AI. I'm just saying the idea that AI will automatically lead to consciousness is hype.
Yeah.
And a better example, the idea that each neuron is just a simple integrate and fire device. There's several problems with that. If you look at individual neurons in awake animals, there's some other variable that regulates firing. There's some other added feature probably coming from inside the neuron, and that would be where you'd want consciousness to come in to regulate firing. But if you think about the neuron is one cell, think about a paramecium. It's one neuron. Okay, the worm I mentioned had 302 neurons. I think I forgot to say that. Yeah. So you have this 302 neuron brain of a worm. You simulate every neuron, every synapse, roughly 1,000 times that, and nothing happens. As an even more stark example, if you go to a even smaller one cell animal like a paramecium, it swims around, it finds food, it finds a mate, it actually has sex, it can avoid obstacles, and it can learn. If you suck it into a capillary tube, it gets out faster and faster each time. So the paramecium with one cell, which would be like one bit in the AI approach, is actually pretty darn clever. And I keep asking my AI friends, simulate a paramecium. Yeah. And of course, they don't take the bait because that would mean it would have to be one bit. You'd probably, I don't know how many bits you would need, and even then whether it would work. But it just shows that the idea that one neuron, one bit is ridiculous.
You think it's
so
10
how does
to
the
1?
paramecium do it?
Or do you think it's like 10 to 1 or 100 to 1, or do you think it's like infinite?
Which it's there's something qualitatively different. I mean, you can have a Google number of neurons of dumb switches. You have the computer that can do almost anything in raw data, but that would not make it conscious. Yeah. And the idea that whatever it's doing is based on strictly computation is probably wrong too, because how would you explain what a paramecium could do, and why can't you explain the worm? So there's something else going on, and it almost has to be at a deeper level, I think, inside the neuron or inside the paramecium. And if you look at how a paramecium gets around, it has these little hair-like things that stick out, like little oars and sensors called cilia. Yeah. And they're in all of our cells, and they're basically little barrels made up of these structures called microtubules. Yeah. And microtubules are the backbone, the skeleton in all of our cells. And because neurons are so asymmetrical, they're very dependent on their asymmetrical cytoskeleton, the microtubules, and they're very prevalent. There's and microtubules are polymers of structures called, proteins called tubulin, and there's about 1 billion tubulins per neuron. Wow. So and these tubulins can switch at pretty fast. Actually, they have resonances at a bunch of different frequency scales, and this is where it really gets interesting because you have all these almost musical resonances going on in these protein polymers inside neurons and inside all cells, but in neurons they're especially orchestrated, and you have these resonances that repeat at different frequency ranges, kind of like music, where you have high frequency instruments and middle frequency and then low frequency, and they resonate across scale and make music. And I think music is actually a better analogy for consciousness than is
the computer. Yeah.
I think the brain is more like an orchestra than a computer, and I think consciousness is more like music than it is a computation. Because it's a computation, who's going to look at it? You need the observer. And I think if you say that the music itself is conscious in some way, that actually goes a long way. And I think that these frequencies, these resonant repeating frequencies that start in microtubules at high frequencies of 10 to the 12th hertz, terahertz, which are these quantum vibrations where anesthetics act. And then you skip about 3 orders of magnitude to gigahertz, and then you skip another, which is 10 to the 9th, 1 billion oscillations per second. Then you skip another 3 to megahertz, 10 to the 6th, 1 million, and skip another 3, you get to kilohertz, and you skip another 3, and you get to hertz, which is EEG. And Roger Penrose and I believe, and actually proposed in several recent papers, that EEG, which everybody has been using for 100 years, and we still don't understand its origin and significance, we think that EEG is like a beat frequency of these faster vibrations. In music, if you have 2 guitars that are slightly out of sync, they'll give a beat and at a much slower rate. And we think these microtubules in dendrites in particular are interfering and giving beats that give rise to EEG. So we see EEG and levels of organization more like music and the brain more like an orchestra.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. And it's not only important for the AI and the singularity sort of crowd. But I mean, we're living in this world right now where materialism is still sort of rules the roost, right? And we have, even though people are having all these different experiences and there's all this science, like the stuff that you guys are doing is out there, but we're still stuck in this paradigm. But you guys really tread that middle ground, right? Between, not so much the woo-woo spiritual part and not materialism, but you've got this theory of that everything at the finest level, I guess, is vibration and resonating, right?
And it's and at the quantum level. I mean, that's the key thing. When you talk about materialism, matter, matter is very transient. Matter, if you look at it at a small scale, if you look at a large scale, everything averages out, so everything's kind of solid and stable. If you look at the small scale, atoms and even small molecules and subatomic particles, electrons and so forth, are generally their natural state is quantum superposition.
Right.
Which means that they're not at any one place or state at the same time. They're actually in multiple places. You can think of them as smeared out like a wave with several peaks, or in two places at once, or multiple places at once, quantum superposition. But we don't see that in our classical world. We see everything in one place, and this is known as and the question of why we don't see that is the measurement problem in quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
When Niels Bohr and von Neumann, the quantum pioneers at the beginning of the 20th century, discovered superposition, they realized from various ways that things can be in multiple states or locations, and this was the beginning of quantum theory. But they didn't see it. We don't see it, and even when they make a measurement with a machine, the superposition collapses. So rather than a particle being here and there, when you observe it, it is either here or there, whereas before it is here and there. So somehow observation, either with the machine or with a human, causes the superposition, the wave function, which would describe it, to collapse or reduce to one state or the other. So, and then Wigner had this idea that even if a machine measured a quantum superposition, the results in the machine would stay in superposition until a human or a conscious observer looked at the results.
Right.
And this led to the idea that consciousness collapses the wave function. Consciousness causes the collapse, causes multiple possibilities to reduce to one or the other. And that tied consciousness to quantum mechanics, and they're still kind of stuck. Although I think that approach is actually backwards. The problem with that approach, that consciousness causes collapse, resolves a lot of problems and allowed Bohr and others to go on their merry way and do a lot of great work without worrying about the underlying reality. Whereas Einstein was more concerned with the nature of the underlying reality. I mean, how could you explain something being in two states at the same time, or two places at the same time? Bohr and those guys, they didn't care. They wanted to do the experiments, and rightfully so, because they were, earth-shattering. And they just said, well, we just assume that the observer causes collapse. The problem with that is, though, that it puts consciousness outside of science. It says we have this weird entity out here, but that whenever it shows up, superpositions collapse to one or the other. So it didn't attempt to explain consciousness. It just kind of used it as a tool to explain away the measurement problem, the superposition problem. But that became known as the Copenhagen interpretation, because after Niels Bohr, who was from Denmark, Copenhagen, the consciousness causes collapse of the wave function. But that doesn't explain consciousness. Now, there's some other explanations for the resolution of the measurement problem. For example, that collapse superposition never disappears, it never collapses, and that each possibility evolves to its own universe. So the particle being here would evolve, and there'd be a universe with the particles in that state, and then their universe would evolve, so the particle is in that state. And then the branching happens again and again and again, and you have this infinite number of multiple worlds, overlapping universe, parallel universe. And as ludicrous as that seems, at least to me and many others, it's a very popular idea because it gets you around the measurement problem. You don't have to worry about superpositions because they just keep, form their own new universes, and you don't need to worry about consciousness to collapse the wave function, because the wave function doesn't collapse. You just keep making new universes. So the multiple worlds, sacrifices the metaphysical baggage of an infinite number of universes to avoid collapse and consciousness. I think it's a cop-out. It's untestable, and it's very popular. It goes with string theory, which is another, I think, bogus idea. Well, the strings aren't bogus. It's the multiple dimensions that are required, as Roger Penrose says.
Right.
So anyway, multiple worlds is another one. And then decoherence, the idea that any quantum superposition will run into a classical state and lose its quantum state. Zurich and Tegmark and those guys. But that doesn't make sense either, because at that level, everything's quantum. So why would there be collapse? They don't even claim that the collapse disappears. They just say, well, you can't see it anymore. So that's another cop-out, in my opinion. So, and then there's a few others. And then Roger Penrose came up with, I think, the one that makes the most sense. It's not the most popular. And I think multiple worlds is most popular, but, it's basically absurd and untestable and shouldn't even count as science, but nonetheless, it's out there. But Roger kind of he started by saying, by asking, what does it mean for a particle, any particle, to be in superposition, to be in two or more states at the same time? And he wrote this in his book in 1989, The Emperor's New Mind. So let me come back to that in a second. But at that point, when I read his book in about 1991, I had spent 20 years obsessed with microtubules that I discussed previously.
Yeah.
The structures inside neurons that are these protein polymers, tube-like hollow cylinders whose walls were kind of like an ear of corn, but in a particular lattice that follows the Fibonacci geometry. And they would self-organize and move around and run things inside the cell. And I started off in doing a research project in medical school in 1972, studying cancer cells, mitosis, how cells divide. And these mitotic spindles, which are microtubules, and centrioles, which are much like cilia that I mentioned earlier, organize this dance where they pull apart the chromosomes to form two. So all the chromosomes are jumbled together. They're duplicated, and the microtubules come along and grab exactly one set for each daughter cell, pull them apart, and the cell divides, and you get one set of genes in each cell. And in the early 70s, I was looking at this under a microscope in a hematology oncology lab, and everybody else in the lab was going crazy about genes because it was the dawn of the genetic revolution, engineering, gene sequencing hadn't happened yet, and everybody was realizing the possibilities. And I'm sure all those guys went off into Genentech or wherever and probably made a lot of money. But for some reason, I got obsessed with the microtubules and how they knew where to go and what to do. What was organizing this dance, this 3 or 4 dimensional ballet of grabbing these chromosomes and moving them around? And they were anchored by the centrioles and accomplished by these structures called microtubules. So I started to look at the structure of microtubules, and they had just been characterized by crystallography by what was her name? I think Amos and Klug, Linda Amos and Aaron Klug in England, and as a cylindrical lattice of usually 13 columns of protofilaments of these individual peanut-shaped proteins called tubulin. And the tubulin, at least in the A lattice, if you looked at the surface of the microtubule, so imagine it's like a corn cob or something, except the kernels are peanut-shaped, like 2 kernels together, and they're slightly offset in these columns, so you could follow these helical pathways around the cylinder. And these helical pathways would intersect. There were several different possible helical pathways you could follow, and they would intersect on any one according to the Fibonacci sequence, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, and so forth, which is a mathematical geometry based on the golden rule and found widely in nature and biology. And somehow this Fibonacci geometry and microtubules seem to organize things and have some kind of native intelligence, at least in mitosis. So I saw that they were lattice-like structures. I was learning about computers, Boolean lattices, Boolean matrices, and I said, they kind of look like computers. And also at that time, it was discovered that neurons were quite full of microtubules, and in fact had an enormous number of microtubules because they were so asymmetrical. And before that time, this was the early 70s, the electron microscope, when people looked inside cells, the fixative agent for electron microscopy was dissolving all of the microtubules, so the cell looked like a watery soup, looked like a minestrone soup of a bunch of stuff floating around, and that was the idea. When I was in college, in biology, they said everything floats around. And so that doesn't make sense. But anyway, it turned out later there's this highly organized lattice structure that organizes everything, but the fixative agent had been dissolving them. So when this guy, Keith Porter at Harvard, switched from osmium tetroxide to glutaraldehyde as a fixative agent, it might have been the other way around, but I think that's right. All of a sudden, he saw all this structure, all these microtubules, and at first people thought, well, those are artifacts, but it turns out, no, they were real, and their absence was artifact because the previous fix had been dissolving them. So, three things. Microtubules seem to have some kind of organizational ability and intelligence. Two, their structure looked like computers. And three, neurons in the brain were full of them. In fact, you could argue that the brain was made of microtubules because neurons are made of microtubules. It's just like, our bodies are, everybody call them, they're part of the cytoskeleton, so the structural support, the bones. The point is they're also the nervous system. They're also the organizational capacity.
Now, are those at the quantum level? Like when you talk about where does it go down to the quantum level? Like are microtubules at that level, or does it have to be even smaller than that to be quantum?
You have to go smaller. You have to go one level down. One level down from that?
So, okay.
Yeah. So what happened was,
quark.
Not quite the quarks. Not quite the quarks. You have to go. So, okay, neurons are like microns. Okay, so 10 to the minus 6 meters, I think. And then when you get down to microtubules, can be that long because they run the whole length of a neuron. Like your sciatic nerve axon goes from your spine to your toe, and that's one neuron. And that's the microtubules in there are continuous in axons. But in dendrites, they're different. They're interrupted in mixed polarity, which makes them even more interesting.
Okay.
But their length can be as long as a neuron, but their width is about 25 nanometers, so a lot smaller. And the individual tubulins, the proteins, are 8 nanometers by 4 nanometers. So they're down at the nanometer scale. And that's getting to the quantum level, but not yet. And especially because what everybody said, for example, the warm, wet, noisy biological milieu, all this water turning around and whatnot, it'd be impossible to have quantum effects at that level. And that's probably true because on the outside of the microtubule and also inside in the hollow core, there's charges sticking out from each tubulin with positive and negative charges which interact with the water. So it's interacting with the water. Now, that may be coherent and dancing with the water, which is another story, but it'd be hard to say that that's quantum because it's so interactive and so forth, unless it's all coherently vibrating, which may be true. But if you then go to a deeper level and you look inside, so take one protein, you have the charges on the outside sticking out into the water, but inside you have areas that are nonpolar, that are not charged, that are more oil-like due to certain aromatic amino acids. So you know that oil and water don't mix, right? You see an oil slick on top of a puddle. They separate. And the reason, and oil, more like benzene, take benzene. It's what goes in our gas tanks. When you put it in bulk, it's explosive, and everybody wants it, and it drives our cars, etc. But if you take the actual molecule benzene by itself, or take that, it's a ring of 6 carbons with 3 extra electrons among the 6 carbons. So what happens is these extra electrons kind of float above and below the ring and form an electron cloud because they're quantum particles. And they form this nonpolar electron cloud, or it's called pi resonance. Pi is the electron orbital that they occupy, and the 3 extra pi resonance orbitals coalesce into one cloud. So each benzene by itself is quite literally a pi resonance cloud of electrons that are not in any one place, but distributed throughout that cloud. So it's basically a quantum entity at that level. And these benzene, they're called aromatic rings, and they're at the end of certain amino acids and also certain neurotransmitters like dopamine. Dopamine is a pleasure molecule. Well, it's basically a benzene ring with a couple OHs and then a little tail with a polar thing that sticks out, and that's dopamine. And serotonin, the mood molecule, has an even more complex ring, and a more complex high resonance cloud. And if you consider other neurotransmitters or other psychoactive compounds like psychedelics, LSD, psilocybin, DMT, all of them are very complex pi resonance clouds. And that means that they have a fairly large region where electrons can roam around. And, well, they're not roaming, they're actually all over the place at any one time. A fairly large quantum system. And when they get into the nervous system, funny things happen. And there was an interesting study about psychedelics in the 70s with Saul Snyder, who discovered the opiate receptor later, and some other guys. And they looked at the potency of a class of psychoactive drugs. I think they were the phenylethylamines, I forget. But they were a series that had fairly similar structure with slight modifications, and they knew the potency of each one. And they were looking for some kind of correlation of potency with something they can measure. And they found that the potency of the particular one of these drugs versus the other was correlated very well with their ability to donate electron resonance energy from the molecule to the receptor. So it had something to do with this pi electron resonance being donated or lent to the receptor when this molecules occupied it. And I think that's what's happening with the psychedelics and also the normal neurotransmitters like dopamine, which is a pleasure molecule, serotonin, and others. Even acetylcholine, which doesn't have a pi resonance ring, but it has three methyls, which can do pretty much act at the same. So what happens is when they bind to their target, their receptor, they push that receptor more into the quantum realm, makes it more of a quantum system. But to do that, they have to get inside the protein, away from all the water and the charge, and into this quantum underground, we call it. Because what happens when a protein folds, okay, and this also applies to membranes and nucleic acids, DNA, and so forth. So a protein is made of a bunch of amino acids. And the way they form is that it starts with these non-polar ends, the oil-like ends, sticking together. Oil avoids water, and so imagine these little lollipops with a benzene ring or an indole ring on one end. All the lollipop ends stick together, and the polar charge, stick outward into the water. That makes it stable in water, but it protects the internal pi resonance cloud. And that's where the quantum stuff happens.
So can I just interrupt for a sec? Yeah. So does that explain what happened with the latest or some of the more recent psychedelic studies where they're doing the brain mapping, or I don't know if mapping's the right word, but where people would be on like psilocybin and they expected the brains to be all lit up, but really is that happening on that quantum underground that you talked about?
Yes, and they weren't lit up.
So there's more energy. So your brain's still... Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that's the work of Robin Carhart Harris and David Nutt. And Robin Carhart Harris has presented at the consciousness conferences several times.
Okay.
And when he presented that, I think in 2012, and it was an amazing study. And what they did, as you said, was they had these volunteers and they gave them intravenous psilocybin so they would act immediately, almost immediately, while they were in an MRI scanner. And so it's like having a mushroom experience while your brain's being monitored, both with MRI and also EEG. And as you said, they were expecting, and then later they verified, the people wrote down their experiences, and they were basically tripping. They were having a psychedelic experience, without a doubt.
Which you would think expending a lot of energy in the brain, right?
Well, that's what they thought. They thought that the MRI would show the brain lit up like a pinball machine, which means increased blood flow and increased metabolism. And they expected EEG to be very active, maybe show high-frequency gamma and whatnot. But what they were stunned to find that the MRI was cold and dark, like nobody was home, like the brain wasn't even active. And the EEG was very low frequency and almost not there. It was very, very pitiful, actually. And they really lacked a good explanation. They later came up with what I thought was kind of a silly explanation. So I'll just give you my explanation.
Yeah.
What they said it didn't make any sense to me, so I'm not even going to try to explain it. What I think is that, as I was saying before, you have these different frequencies and in the brain, from starting at the fastest terahertz, 10 to the 12, gigahertz, megahertz, kilohertz, and hertz. And EEG is in the hertz. And I think normally, we're having activity across all these frequencies. Like in an orchestra, you have high frequency, you have the piccolos, and you have stuff in the middle, and you get down to the oboes, and you get down to really percussion. So you have all these frequencies interacting in a very resonant and harmonic way. And I think what happened in those studies, I think the psychedelic, the psilocybin molecule, went into its target, its receptors, and what that is another question, but we'll just leave that aside, and increased the quantum state. And basically, the subjects were highly conscious. They were having psychedelic experiences, but they were also kind of disengaged from their membranes. They were disengaged from any need for cognitive function. They didn't need to drive a car. They didn't need to walk. They didn't need to do anything. They were just having a conscious experience, and their membranes were silent. You didn't need the membranes. Everything was happening at the deeper level. Yeah, I think in the microtubules. Yeah, and so they're conscious in they're having quantum activity in their microtubules at a very intensely, but their membranes are on vacation. And if you wouldn't want somebody like that to drive you home because their membranes are disconnected, but for them internally, they're having an amazing conscious experience. So that was my explanation. The consciousness occurs at a deeper level. And it's always happening at that level to some extent, but it kind of shifts. It's like the orchestra, all of a sudden, everything shifts to very high-frequency stuff to the point that, you may not even hear it. Like even dog whistles, it gets so high-frequency that we can't hear it. In this case, there's no outward sign of it, but internally, the subject is highly conscious and expanded consciousness, because when you're in the quantum state, things are non-local and entangled. So your entire brain, even though it appears inactive at the membrane level or the metabolic level, is in highly quantum coherent state. It's like lasers getting tuned to each other and becoming resonant. And I think that's what happens.
Go ahead.
Well, that just expands your consciousness, and I think it can even take you to even deeper levels and higher frequencies. So, like the Beatles said, the deeper you go, the higher you fly. The higher you fly, the deeper you go. As you go to a higher frequency, you go deeper into consciousness, and in those cases, deeper into the psychedelic state.
So, if we're affecting these little
microtubules
with psychedelics, are people like this Wim Hof or other people that are experts at different meditation techniques and things like that, are they somehow affecting these same microtubules at a different level?
That's what I was going to ask, if it's the same as lucid dreaming and meditation and all these other things. Is the same thing possibly happening?
Well, put aside lucid dreaming. Lucid dreaming is interesting. We can come back to that. But if you just talk about meditation, it's been known for a long time that the Dalai Lama's best monk meditators who were sent to Davidson's lab 10 years ago or so and recorded while meditating have a higher baseline EEG frequency. So what you can measure basically easily is EEG. So, most people operate about 40 hertz, 40 their EEG. I mean, I think that's just literally the tip of the iceberg of activity at deeper level. But the monk's baseline was 80. And when they meditated, it went even higher. So they have, permanent changes in neuroplasticity, causing them to have higher frequency EEG at baseline, and then even higher when they meditate. But I suspect that that's quite literally the tip of the iceberg. And if you look inside, which people like Anirban Bandipati have done experimentally, you see these higher frequency activities going on, and they're probably at that level. And I'm pretty sure that meditators, the metabolism goes down, and their brains probably look fairly inactive, kind of like the psychedelic. Certainly certain trained Hindu practitioners can slow their metabolism way down for a long time and barely even have to breathe. So I think metabolism can go way down, but consciousness goes up. Even though most people think they have to be related, they're not necessarily related.
And then our emotional state, like we know now that, being in a state of, let's say, love or bliss or something resonates and the frequency is different from our heart and probably other areas as opposed to being in like a state of hate. So does that connect to the microtubules as well? And can we consciously or unconsciously affect the workings at that level?
Well, there's a good connection between the brain and the heart. Heart math, and a lot of people talk about that. And the heart has a lot of ganglia and neurons and microtubules. And some people think there's consciousness in the heart, and there seems to be memory in the heart based on heart transplant stories. So I think they're connected. But when you talked about feelings and emotions and love versus hate or something, I think actually that's a very important question that people have a hard time with. And let me tell you my take on that, because I just wrote a chapter about this.
Yeah, for sure, because it's so intangible. Like, so we need to sort of like lay that out so people can understand it better. Yeah,
well, I mean, feelings are consciousness, and you can't. It's the hard problem. You can't really put your finger on what it is, but we all know what it is. You know what it's like to feel. I know what it's like to feel, but how that happens is unknown. So let me switch gears a second. I'll come back to that point to evolution, because everybody says that life evolved and then consciousness. Well, not everybody. Most people say life originated, a couple billion years ago, and then evolved, and then at some point consciousness emerged as a result of complex information processing.
Yeah.
Maybe fairly recently with tools and language, or maybe earlier, but at some point in the evolution of life. Now, the Vedanta and Eastern philosophy, Buddhist people would say consciousness has been here all along. And consciousness, and even panpsychists would say that consciousness has been here all along and is part of the furniture of the universe. It's just there somehow. But how? If you're a panpsychist would say, that it's like this is what I think they're saying. They may not agree. It's like consciousness is painted on an atom. It's like a quality of an atom or of a molecule or something. And if you put it together in the right way, you get us. That I don't think that's right. That because is it painted on at the level of molecule, of atoms, of quarks, of gluons, what? Or empty space-time even. What is empty space-time? That's another question. Anyway, if you go back, okay, this brings us back to what I was talking about before about Roger Penrose's book. So bear with me here. So I had spent 20 years going around to talking about microtubules as information processors, strictly classical, saying that the singularity, the target for the singularity was much higher because we had to consider processing inside neurons. Because a paramecium could be so smart, how could a neuron be so stupid? So each neuron had about 1 billion tubulins switching at about 10 megahertz, which is 10 to the 16th operations per second per neuron. Now remember, that's what the singularity people were saying for the entire brain. But I was saying, no, that's the capacity for every neuron. So I was going around to AI meetings and neural network meetings and saying, hey, your target is way downstream. You guys are fooling yourselves. And they didn't like that. They would say, go away, you bother me. And, we need this money, and they're not going to give us money if you don't shut your mouth. So I became somewhat unpopular, but, I earned my keep as an anesthesiologist. I don't have to get grants. I never have had to get grants, so I can just follow my nose. And I think that's one of the problems with the system.
Yeah.
Because you got to please the people giving away the money, so you got to do what they think is right, and they're usually wrong.
Yeah.
Which is why we don't really understand the brain after all this. And this whole brain mapping idea is stupid and ridiculous. But anyway, I was unpopular then, and one day somebody said to me, he laid the hard problem on me. David Chalmers made this famous later, but of things like memory and attention and behavior are relatively easy compared to consciousness, qualia, feelings. That was the hard problem. Anyway, one day some guy said to me, let's say you're right, wise guy. How would that explain all this microtubule problem? How would that explain consciousness? How would that explain feelings, love, joy, emotion, consciousness? And I was a little stunned, actually. I realized this guy had nailed me, that I was a reductionist and didn't really have an idea about consciousness, although I thought at that time and still think I was right about microtubule-based information processing. But fortunately, that same guy suggested I read a book by Roger Penrose called The Emperor's New Mind. And so I did. And Roger wrote it in 1989. I think it was probably 91 when I read it. And it was an amazing book. The Emperor's New Mind, parable of the Hans Christian Andersen story, the Emperor's New Clothes, about the emperor walking around naked and everybody's too, enamored of him being emperor to tell him. And some kid said, hey, he doesn't have any clothes. So The Emperor's New Mind, Roger's title, was meant to imply that the emperor, and probably referring to Marvin Minsky, the scion of AI, really didn't have a clue. It was really naked in terms of explaining how the mind works. And Roger spent the first half of that book arguing through Gödel's theorem very laboriously that comprehending, was not a computation, that there had to be something from the outside coming in, a non-computable effect, to bring understanding, and based on Gödel's theorem. And I didn't understand this argument at all. It was very philosophical, very dry, and I'm kind of like glazing over. But he took the time to explain it and make the strong argument. And then the second half of the book, and by the way, to me, I'll simplify it. To me, understanding is a feeling. You can look when you look at something, and when you understand what it is, you comprehend it. That's a feeling. And one example is like the game of chess. And James Tagg has been putting some of these online lately, where there are certain chessboard situations. Even though a computer will generally beat a human in chess, there are certain situations that require understanding of the game and not brute force calculations. And in those conditions, the human will win. So understanding is a human consciousness feature, and it's basically a feeling. I feel that that's right? Isn't that how we know something's right? We just know it. It's a feeling. So that's the way I skip over all that Gödel stuff and come, that understanding is a feeling. To understand something, we have to have consciousness. What the heck is consciousness? So Roger said it had to be something from outside. Okay, what was it? Well, this gets back to what we were talking about before, about collapse of the wave function and the measurement problem. So remember, we had a couple possibilities. Number one, consciousness caused collapse of the wave function. Number two, decoherence, that the quantum superposition ran into something classical. Number three, multiple worlds, that there's no collapse. None of those really work when you think about it. So Roger came up with an idea called objective reduction. And what he said was, he began by asking, what the hell does it mean for something to be in two places at once? This is a question that nobody else has even attempted to answer. And to answer it, he made a monumental leap and connected quantum mechanics to general relativity, something that's been wanting in physics, the grand unification theory, linking quantum mechanics to general relativity. Everybody's been trying to do that. But he did it conceptually. Not necessarily fully mathematically, but conceptually. So general relativity is about curvature in space-time geometry. And, Einstein came up with the idea that space-time is curved, and that accounted for gravity. For example, because if space-time is curved, you're going to follow the trajectory. And he predicted that the sun being causing a big curvature in space-time around it, that a distant star behind the sun, its light would be bent around the sun and could be visible to us during an eclipse when the sun wasn't there to block it out. So Arthur Eddington in the 20s, I think, went to this mountaintop during an eclipse. He knew that the star would be behind the sun, or should be behind the sun. And when the eclipse happened, lo and behold, he could see the star in front of the sun, meaning that the space-time had curved the light, that the light from that star had followed the curvature of space-time so that we could see it, despite the fact that it was literally behind the sun, that the curvature, the mass of the sun had induced this curvature, and we could see this star. And that proved Einstein's theory, and he got the Nobel Prize, and maybe Eddington did too, I forget. But it was a really monumental achievement that proved general relativity, that space-time is curved. Now, what space-time actually is another question. But we know it goes down to the Planck scale at 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, and Roger's probably the world's expert on what that is with his twistor theory and quantum geometry and so forth. But whatever it is, it has a curvature to it. So what he said, to bring it together with quantum mechanics and quantum superposition, he said, okay, let's say first of all, four-dimensional space-time is too hard to imagine. So he used simple two-dimensional space-time sheets. So imagine taking 3 dimensions of space and condensing it to one, just for argument's sake, and then putting on one axis and then time on the other. So you have a little sheet, a little like piece of paper, and you can draw it. You can see it on a slide. And a mass, a particle. Well, first, a mass or particle would be a curvature in one direction, if you will. If that same particle if it was in a different location, it would be a curvature in another direction. So a particle in two places at once is basically simultaneous curvature of both space-time. And these little space-time sheets that he had in his book, which I still remember vividly, would separate, and if they continued, you can imagine that each curvature would evolve its own universe, and you'd have multiple worlds, and that would happen again and again. But the trick was, he said, that these separations, these superpositions, which are actually separations in the very structure of the universe, were unstable and would, after a time, particular time t, given by the very simple indeterminacy principle equals h over t, at time t would undergo reduction at this objective threshold, hence objective reduction, or OR as he calls it. So the superposition separations would only go up to a point in time, and then collapse to one or the other. And that was the end of the superposition. You didn't need multiple worlds. You didn't need the outside observer. Now, the real kicker was, well, there are two kickers. The first kicker was, when that happens, every time that happens, a moment of consciousness occurs. So he was saying the opposite of Copenhagen. Copenhagen was saying that consciousness causes collapse. He was saying the collapse causes consciousness. The collapse happens spontaneously due to this intrinsic feature of curvature of space-time geometry. It can only go so far, and it collapses to it reduces, undergoes reduction due to this objective threshold, and you have objective reduction, OR. A little thing, if you will, occurs at that level. And not only, and that curvature in particles would not only apply to big things like the sun, but small things. So, sun, big object, big curvature, atom or electron, small particle, small curvature, but still curvature. And even an electron in superposition will be a separation or a shredding or a blistering in the very structure of the universe, and which would tend to want to branch off and form a new universe, but the instability is unstable, and after a time t, there's a collapse and a moment of conscious awareness. So these would be occurring everywhere in the universe, here, there, and everywhere, which means that consciousness was kind of at this level, or what we prefer to call proto-consciousness, because these are random moments, disjointed, and not entangled, so they're isolated and random. You know, little random moments of awareness here, there, and everywhere, but then there's no memory, they're forgotten. And it's kind of like panpsychism, where consciousness is everywhere. But in this case, consciousness is not occurring due to being painted on an atom, or it's occurring due to a collapse. So if an atom is in superposition of two states and then collapses to one, that's when the moment of consciousness occurs. And it also suggests that consciousness is not a property or a state, but it's a sequence of events, the sequence of collapse, 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 similar to the ideas of Alfred North Whitehead, who said the process philosopher, who said consciousness is a sequence of events or occasions of experience. Very similar to Whitehead. In fact, there was Abner Shimony who likened Whitehead's occasion of experience to quantum state collapses. And Roger's quantum state collapses, this objective reduction is due to this instability in space-time geometry, is a perfect explanation for that happening, connecting Whitehead, quantum physics, and consciousness. So that means that these random moments are happening here, there, and everywhere. So Andy suggested there must be something in the brain. So in his book, he talked about this, and I remember looking at these pictures. I'm going, oh my God, this guy's like out there. But that is so cool. And it was kind of blown away. I thought about it for weeks and realized how to everybody, and even to me, it seemed like a stretch. You know, you're going to explain the brain and consciousness, you're going to go to space-time geometry and the Planck scale, and what the hell? But as he later said, quoting Sherlock Holmes, if you eliminate the impossible, whatever is left must be true, no matter how seemingly improbable. So he pretty much ruled out everything else. You have to get out of the computational system. And if you think of the universe as materialistic and a billiard ball universe, the only way to go, the only other place to go, is quantum mechanics, where you find a big mystery. So he essentially decided, I don't know if he just deduced, that the mystery of consciousness and the mystery of quantum mechanics might be related. It might be the same mystery. Now, we've been accused of that being a vice, not a virtue, that invoking when Roger and I hooked up in our theory, which I'll come to in a bit, of Dave Chalmers kidded us for invoking the law of minimization of mysteries. But I think, it could be true, and it links general relativity to structure of the universe, quantum mechanics, and the brain and consciousness. But he didn't have a way to organize this in the brain. He needed a quantum computer in the brain. And I read this book, and after grokking it and figuring out how profound it was, I said, "Holy crap! Microtubules are the quantum computer he's looking for." And this subjective reduction was the mechanism that I've been looking for consciousness. In other words, the objective reduction couldn't happen at the level of neurons; they're too big. But you needed something smaller that could be a quantum and could influence neuron to control behavior and make your arm move and your voice speak. Something that could control behavior and have consciousness. And microtubules had to be quantum computers in some way. And I had already been thinking along those lines to some extent, but didn't really know enough about quantum mechanics. Anyway, I wrote to Roger, and I sent him some papers I read about microtubules, told him about them, and said, by the way, I was going to be in England for a conference, and if you want it, I'd be happy to visit him. I was delighted when he wrote back and invited me to his mathematical institute in Oxford, where we sat for about 4 hours, where I did almost all the talking, asked me some questions, and I told him everything about microtubules. And he mentioned that he was going to a conference on consciousnness at Cambridge with Dan Dennett and Pat Churchland and some other bigwigs, philosophers, who were sure to give him a hard time about his ideas, because they hated the idea of quantum mechanics. They want the brain to be classical computer, period, end of story, no mystery, which I don't think it could be, but, that's really the mainstream view. Anyway, Roger thanked me, and we said goodbye, and I went on my way, and I said, well, that was interesting. I couldn't go to the conference in Cambridge. I had another conference to go to. A couple of weeks later, I was going back to London, having the night before flying back, and a friend of mine, having dinner with a friend, he said, hey, this guy I know went to Cambridge and to this conference, and Roger Penrose was talking about you and your microtubules. And I was just like blown away and thrilled. And the next thing I know, I was invited to this conference in northern Sweden with Roger and Dan Dennett and a few other people. And, I got to know Roger a little bit more. His wife, Vanessa, was there. They had just recently been married. And we spent a lot of time together playing ping pong, which was popular in the basement of this. It was a weird conference, just like speakers only and no audience. And we had a lot of time to talk and went on walks in the midnight sun. And we actually went skiing at midnight up there. It was way north of the Earth Circle, the polar circle, they call it. And I invited him at that. I was organizing the first Tucson conference, Science of Consciousness, Tour de Science of Consciousness, that was then. And I invited him, and he accepted. And I kind of bribed him. I said, I'll take you to the Grand Canyon afterwards, which I did. And he and his wife, and we began a friendship and a collaborative relationship. And we then met again a few months later and started to quantify our ideas, come up with a formal model of objective reduction in microtubules. And Roger said one night, he said, well, what should we call it? And this, because it's different. And I said, I don't know, let me think about it. So I went for a long bike ride, and on this bike ride, the idea of orchestration came to me. I was actually coasting down the hill. It was quite pleasurable, and orchestrated objective reduction. And I had a kind of musical analogy in mind. It was because the microtubules orchestrated things inside the cell. And I bounced it off Roger at breakfast the next morning. We were staying in the same house, a big family house that we rented rooms out of for a couple-week period around a conference. And at the Danish Technical University, where he had friends and I had spent a sabbatical. And he said, oh, I like that. And so that's what we call it, orchestrated objective reduction. And we started to quantify it. We figured out that for a 40 hertz moment, in the equation, if you set t equal to 40 hertz, that you get about 100,000 neurons worth of microtubules, which seemed to work with other theories. So we were off to a good start. But that's his wife said to me. She said, I encourage you to work with Roger, but I just want to warn you, he's very meticulous. He's way overburdened. This is going to take a long, long, long time. And I said, okay, I'm willing to stick with it. So that was in June, and by the following Christmas or so, New Year's, we didn't even have a manuscript. We were going back and forth by fax. It was very slow going. And I was in Tucson, he was in England. Anyway, I think in January of '95, I got an email. I guess I had email then from the publisher, a friend of mine, of the Journal of Consciousness Studies, East Sutherland, and he wrote to Roger too, and he said, Pat Churchland and her graduate student, Pat Churchland is a materialist philosopher at UC San Diego, and a harsh critic, one of our harshest critics, and which is okay. I kind of like jousting with her and others. Anyway, he and a graduate, we hadn't published anything, but Roger had been talking about it, and I had been talking about it online in a discussion group and at conferences and whatnot, about quantum microtubules and consciousness and so forth. And Roger's also famous for tiling the plane with five-fold symmetry. So Penrose tilings were one of his hallmarks of fame. So they wrote this harshly critical, sarcastic, kind of obnoxious paper in the Journal of Consciousness Studies called Gaps in Penrose's Toiling, a pun on tilings. Because he tiled the plane completely, and the gap would be a defect, so it wouldn't be tiling, but it was toiling. So it was kind of a clever title, Gaps in Penrose's Toilings. And at the end, then he talked about microtubules, and they said Penrose and Hameroff's theory, it wasn't really a theory then, but it was moving towards a theory. Their theory is no better supported than 1 in a gazillion caterpillar with hookah hypotheses. Whoa. 1 in a gazillion caterpillar with hookah hypotheses. As in, what have you guys been smoking? Or something like that. And I was amused, but also kind of pissed off. But what they had done in the article was, the first half of their article was attacking Roger on the Gödel's theorem argument. The second half of the article, which she had assigned apparently to her grad student, Rick Grush, who's now a really prominent philosopher, was about microtubules. So it was and Grush had been on an email discussion group called Psyche D. This was the first one I was aware of, and it was quite intense for a few years. It faded away after a while. Now there's a zillion of them, of course, but this was the first one I was aware of. And he was on it, and I was on it, and I've been blabbing about microtubules and so forth. So he took me on the second part of about attacking the idea of microtubules as quantum devices, and most specifically as being relevant to consciousness. So his big body blow that he was going to knock me out with was the following. There's a drug called colchicine, which is used for gout. Gout is, the joint by your big toe or some other part of your body swells up because of uric acid crystals, urate crystals. And what happens is the immune cells, the lymphocytes and the macrophages, rush in to engulf the urate crystals and release a lot of stuff and cause inflammation, and the joint swells and hurts like hell. It's called gout. And it comes from eating rich food, and supposedly a lot of the kings had it and whatnot. You see a picture of this guy with his foot up on a pillow with his toe swelling. And anyway, there's a drug called colchicine, which attacks the microtubules and prevents them. So anyway, let me back up. The lymphocytes and the macrophage move into the joint because their microtubules assemble and disassemble and assemble and disassemble. The thing literally flows to where they're supposed to go. Now, how they know where to go is another question. That also involves the microtubules. But just their motor ability, their ability to get where they want to go, move along, is by microtubules assembling and disassembling. So, and then colchicine binds to microtubules or tubulin and prevents this assembly-disassembly. So if you have gout and you take colchicine, it helps a lot because it prevents the lymphocytes, the white cells, from moving into the joint. In other words, it's not the urate crystals that cause the pain. It's the lymphocytes and the macrophages, the immune cells that move in by virtue of their microtubule activity to engulf the urate and release all the stuff, and that swells, and that's what hurts like hell. So if you paralyze the lymphocytes with this colchicine, no gout or no pain. So Rick Rush tells a story, and then he says, but people who take colchicine for gout don't lose consciousness. Therefore, microtubules cannot be essential for consciousness. And he really thought he had us. And anyway, so I read this article, and Roger read it, and the editor says, you guys can respond if you put a paper together. You can respond to the very next issue if you give me a manuscript in 2 weeks. And I'm going to myself, 2 weeks? It's been 8 months and we don't have anything.
Yeah.
We're screwed. And but fortunately, Roger was sufficiently annoyed because of the girls' argument thing. And he said, well, let's do it this way. He said, I'll deal with girdle. You deal with the microtubules. And I said, absolutely. So by dividing the labor that way, he said he worked on his own on the girdle theorem. I worked on the microtubules. We wrote an abstract together, and we put out our paper. That was, and I'll tell you what I said about the colchicine in a minute. But the title of the paper, theirs was Gaps in Penrose and Toilings. Ours was What Gaps? And what we said was, so what I said about the coach, so he took care of the girls' argument. I took care of all the microtubule arguments. And the colchicine story was simple because, first of all, it only affects microtubules that are actively assembling and disassembling. And the microtubules in the brain don't do that. Neurons don't divide. This is a key point. The neurons in the brain don't divide. Therefore, they're microtubules. So in all other cells, when it's time to divide, the microtubules that are arrayed all over the place disassemble, form tubulins, then reassemble as mitotic spindles so the cell can divide, form daughter cells, and the microtubules go back to doing what they were doing. So if you were going to store memory, for example, in microtubules, you couldn't do that in those kinds of cells because every time they disassembled, you'd lose the memory. In neurons, the microtubules stay assembled, and they would store memory that's stored in microtubule lattices. We actually have a good idea now how that happens through this enzyme called CAMK2. But to be that as it may, the colchicine doesn't affect microtubules that don't disassemble and reassemble, number one. Number two, colchicine doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. It's too charged. So it's not going to get into the brain at all. Number three, I found a paper from somebody in France who had, for some reason, injected colchicine into the CSF, into the ventricles of mice, and they wiped them out. They were like, they pretty much destroyed their brain because the colchicine did screw up the microtubules there. So I pretty much dispensed with that argument and the other ones, which were sillier. And in the end, to counter their statement of no better, the Alice in Wonderland story. So the idea that our idea was no better than one in a gazillion caterpillar with hookah hypothesis came from Alice in Wonderland, where the caterpillar was sitting on a mushroom smoking a hookah, and Alice, I forget what she was doing. But so that's what they were saying. So what we said, but it was Alice in Wonderland. So what we said was, perhaps we're not in Wonderland, perhaps their heads are in the sand, suggesting that they were ostriches with their heads buried in the sand, which is basically true, actually. So the editor of the journal, who is a pretty interesting character, got this artist to do a cartoon. It turns out this guy was actually a kind of a erotic artist. I found out later, and but pretty clever guy. So he did this cartoon where this caterpillar, whose head and face looked just like me for some reason, sitting on this giant mushroom, smoking a hookah, and on the other side is Roger holding the keys to dressed as a white rabbit, holding the keys to the Platonic realm. And the Platonic realm is something that we haven't gotten to yet. And in between us are two kind of scrawny ostriches with their heads buried in their sand, with their butts facing the viewer, with Grush and Churchland written on their butts, or G and C, I guess it was. And they had me, the caterpillars, blowing the hookah smoke up their butts. So that's kind of how they captured the moment. And they sent it to us. Actually, Roger and I were at a meeting at the Fetzer Institute when they said, hey, we want to. So we wrote the article, we sent it, and they said, okay, we're going to publish it. And just when they're about to go to press, we get this fax or phone call or whatever from the journal. They said, hey, we had this artist do this sketch. Do you mind? And I looked at it and I said, oh my God, I can't believe this. But I said, what the hell? But I didn't know if Roger would go for it. And he was there with me, and he said, yeah, why not? So they published this, and it's out there, and I still have a copy. But the point was that was our first paper in 1995. And it was fortuitous because without them attacking us, it probably would have been another year.
Yeah.
But in 96, we came out with two papers. One, a book chapter where we laid out all the details in agonizing detail, I might say, and then wrote another paper for Journal of Conscious Studies for the hard problem. Then Dave Chalmers had made famous his hard problem, and we wrote a paper basically saying that the hard problem was solved by these self-collapses occurring due to separation in space-time geometry. And that was our solution to the hard problem. And we then wrote, we didn't collaborate again. I wrote a number of papers about it until the last few years. But anyway, that was our first paper, and then the subsequent papers. And our ideas were greeted with a lot of critical skepticism, if not derision. We really pissed people off for a lot of reasons. First of all, the AI people didn't like it because it was saying that not only did we have to go to even greater computation, we had to go to quantum to capture the essence of the brain. So they didn't like that for several reasons. It pissed off the physicists because they didn't like Roger's approach to the measurement problem. They preferred multiple worlds or coherence or something else, because who the hell wanted to mess with consciousness? Why were we, I'm paraphrasing their thoughts, why were we bringing consciousness and messing up a perfectly nice materialistic universe, even though it didn't make any sense? And neuroscientists didn't like it because they thought, you can explain everything at the neural membrane and synapse level. And hardly anyone did like it, actually. Except, actually, people started to like it. People who liked it were more in the kind of the spiritual, new age kind of thing, which Roger didn't really take to. But I kind of agree with a lot of that stuff. But I think it has to be based on science. Woo-woo, like you say. But But what they're describing is subjective experience. They just need a scientific basis for it. So anyway, people mostly ridiculed it on the basis of the decoherence argument, because in our early papers we were saying, okay, so the brain is clocking at 40 hertz, 40 times a second, which is 25 milliseconds. So we were thinking we had to avoid decoherence. We had to maintain a quantum state in microtubules, not just in one microtubule, but in microtubules that are entangled across a significant region of the brain for 25 milliseconds. And that's a long time at the quantum level. And it was so we got ripped for that, because everybody said, well, I mean, quantum computer technology, to build a quantum computer in a laboratory, you have to worry about thermal vibrations and heat. You have to worry about atoms bumping into it and messing up the quantum superposition. And so they do it at absolute zero temperature. So all the quantum stuff was done at absolute zero temperature in the lab with liquid nitrogen and all this. And they go, ha, 37 degrees centigrade in the brain, the warm, wet, noisy brain, you must be joking. It's impossible. And we said, well, how do you know? Biology has had billions of years to evolve a mechanism, number one. Number two, I said it's happening not out in the water, but it's happening in the quantum underground, in these nonpolar oil-like regions inside proteins. Not only inside proteins, inside membranes and also nucleic acids. They all have this nonpolar quantum interior, what we now call the quantum underground. We being Jack Jasinski, Travis Craddock, and I, who collaborated in parallel with my collaboration with Roger over the years, and also Anirban Bandyapati, who's done the actual experiments. I'll come to him in a second. I was saying it's happening in the quantum underground, not out in the water. And anyway, how do you know? So it was basically theory versus theory, and we were definitely outvoted. So we were thought to be kind of an oddball idea, and still are by most people, or many people. However, in 2006, it began to be realized that something as universal in life as photosynthesis, by which plants capture photons and convert them to energy, food energy, chemical energy that we eat, or animals eat. We eat the animals, and without which life could not exist. That what happens in photosynthesis is that there's this protein complex with three components. One collects the photons. The second one transfers the energy to the third part, which converts it to chemical energy in food. And it turns out that the middle part, which is called the FMO protein, somehow the photons are converted to excited electrons, excitons, which are quantum particles, and propagate through this protein in multiple paths simultaneously. In other words, it's not just like a current flowing from one point to another. It's that these excitons spread out. They're either the same exciton in superposition or multiple excitons. I'm not sure. But I think it's probably, you can think of them as the same in multiple pathways, and get to the end of it, and then get converted to food. And if this propagation, if this transfer is not very efficient, you don't make food, animals don't survive, we don't survive. This needs to be very efficient. And it turns out that what happens is the excitons either hop or propagate or through what are called chromophores, which are essentially the pi resonance groups I was talking about before, kind of like complex benzene, little regions of them. And they transmit, propagate, mediate the quantum superposition, the quantum transfer from the photon being collected to making food. So this quantum superposition, this quantum traveling salesman problem, where the guy goes through all possible pathways at the same time, is the most efficient way. And without that, there wouldn't be the sufficient transfer of food. And not only that, it was happening in sunlight. It was happening at warm temperature, at ambient temperature. So if a plant can do it, if a rutabaga or a potato can figure out how to utilize quantum coherence at room temperature, certainly our brains, after billions of years of evolution, or however many years, could do so. So that was good for us. However, people said, well, blah, blah, blah. You have to show it in microtubules. And then some other evidence for quantum biology came out in bird brain navigation and a few other things. And then in 2009, I met this guy, Anirban Bandyapati, an Indian scientist working in Japan at the National Institute of Material Science. I was going to a conference in Hong Kong. He emailed me and said, "Hey, I've got evidence for your theory. I want to meet you in Hong Kong."
Wow.
Said, absolutely fantastic. So I remember we sat down. He pulls out his laptop and starts showing me slide after slide after slide after slide of stuff that it was hard to keep up with. And basically what he had done is experiments where he took individual microtubules. He's a nanotechnologist so he does nanotechnology and biology. And by the way, he got his lab in Japan, the National Institute of Material Sciences, which is one of the outstanding places in the world in materials, have a contest every year for the smartest graduate student, not even a postdoc, graduate student around the world, and they give them their own lab. They said, forget it, just come here and work, do what you want. And they have a worldwide contest, and he won it.
Wow.
And right out of grad school, he went there, and they gave him whatever he wanted. And he started doing this. Well, the first thing he did was build a molecular computer with a molecule called hydroquinones that was published in, I forgot, before I met him, and I forget where. But then he got interested in microtubules. He read our papers, and he started working on microtubules, and he learned all this biology. So he would take an individual microtubule at room temperature and put 4 nanoprobes, scanning tunneling microscope probes, or atomic force microscopes, on one microtubule, and use them as kind of electrodes to stimulate and record. So he has a microtubule, which is a good insulator, basically, unless you find its resonant frequency. And there's this microtubule at ambient temperature. It's not frozen, it's at ambient temperature. And he puts 2 electrodes, nanoprobes to stimulate, and 2 to record. And if you just measure its resistance, it's a perfect insulator. But if you then stimulate with alternating current the other 2 electrodes and get it vibrating, and then measure the current, the resistance, you find that at certain critical frequencies, the resistance drops, it plummets, it becomes almost superconductive, except that there's a resistance between the electrode and the surface of the microtubule, and it's probably being transmitted through the quantum underground. But at certain frequencies, the microtubule becomes highly conductive. And he mapped these frequencies, and as I said, they're in the terahertz, gigahertz, megahertz, gigahertz, and then hertz. And at each frequency band, he got a triplet pattern. In other words, if he plotted out the resistance, he got a triplet, and then if you looked inside that triplet, in each of those 3 peaks, you got another 3 peaks, and maybe even more if you went down. So it's like a fractal at each frequency, and you can think of the whole thing as a frequency fractal. That's what he calls it. And he found these resonances in these microtubules at all these frequencies. So, and he eventually published in 2013. So that was very good evidence for our theory, although when he finally published, he didn't use the word quantum because he said basically the reviewers wouldn't let him. But it almost has to be a quantum effect. But more to the point, he said in the paper that if you measure the resistance across one tubule, in other words, over one little protein, and at any particular frequency, and compare that to the resistance over an entire microtubule, what you found, now normally you'd expect the resistance, the current flow through one tubule and one protein, the resistance to be lower, the current to be higher than if you did it through a whole microtubule, because the resistance would add up, so the current should be lower. What he found was that the current through an entire microtubule was much, much higher than through an individual tubulet, which essentially has to be a quantum effect. And Roger agreed with that. And also that it was temperature independent, that no matter what temperature, you still got the same effect, and that has to be a quantum effect. So that's in the paper, but he couldn't come out and say it's a quantum effect because the reviewers wouldn't let him. So the evidence is there. Now, since then, he's done a number of other studies where he actually did this inside active neurons and in bundles of microtubules, and has found this frequency fractal from terahertz all the way up to gigahertz, megahertz, kilohertz, and hertz. His papers are very difficult to read, but nonetheless, the data is there. So in other words, we've had pretty good supportive evidence. Of course, that doesn't change people's minds. Evidence doesn't really matter when you've got a strong, belief and you're highly invested in selling your idea. So, nonetheless, I maintain that the evidence for our theory is far greater than for any other theory of consciousness. Nobody has come up with a testable theory, even idea, a testable prediction of how you can prove consciousness is a network effect or an emergent effect or a neuronal effect. Because all those neurons have microtubules, so even if you proved it wouldn't show it would. Now that's a bit of an unfair statement, but what we intend to do is, and we hope to do this at the Penrose Institute, which was announced today, with Honor Bond's help, is to reproduce his quantum resonances in microtubules inside neurons, get this spectral plot of the fractal frequency, and then do the entire thing again in the presence of anesthesia, and see if this resonance goes away. And then if it does, see if it comes back when you turn off the anesthesia. And if you do it in the gas phase, you can just do it continuously. And then we do it with a different anesthetic that's twice as potent and see if you only need half as much. And you do that for all these different anesthetics. This goes back to what's called the Meyer-Overton correlation, that anesthetic potency is proportional to their solubility, essentially in benzene, in olive oil, in these pi resonance. So the solubility in these pi resonance group of anesthetics is directly proportional to their potency. The more potent it is going in the quantum underground, the more potent it is in inhibiting consciousness. So we would do that. We hope to do that experiment, and then we'll try psychedelics. We'll give it some dopamine, or we'll give it some LSD, or we'll give it some psilocybin, and see what happens to the quantum resonances. Well, this isn't a test tube, fellas. Settle down.
I'll go in a test tube.
What we would do would then add it and then measure. And what I would predict would be that the frequencies would go higher, and the slower frequencies, like in Robin Carhart Harris's subjects, that the slower frequencies would slow down, and there'd be a big shift towards the higher frequency. And it could be that, at least in the brain, that under certain circumstances, that you could shift to even higher frequencies that are too high to be stuck to the biology, would be happening in the structure of space-time geometry, and possibly non-local.
After you die.
Yes, out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, and so forth, and even after death. And by the way, there's some very interesting work about people who, this guy at George Washington University, I'll think of his name in a second, has done work putting brain monitors, Chawla, Lakhmir Chawla, Chawla, who is a palliative care specialist who takes care of people who were dying, and if they withdraw support with family and approval and whatnot, he's putting these brain monitors on these patients, same ones we use in anesthesia, and at the time of death, there's this EEG number, goes to 0. It's kind of a compiled number. So basically, 80 to 100 is awake. 40 to 60 is where you put on your patient under anesthesia, so they're not awake. Below that is some kind of brain damage. So as the patients approach death, their number, the heart rate slows and the blood pressure slows, and then they get to they get towards 0, and the heart has stopped. And then, in about half the cases, there's a burst of activity in the high gamma frequency. And it's the sign under any other circumstance of being highly conscious and highly awake. And some people explain it away by saying, well, it's just random spasms of dying neurons. But that makes no sense at all, because gamma has to be highly coherent over a wide part of the brain. So it's completely unexplained.
I wonder why half only.
What's that?
I wonder why half only.
Yeah, well, that's a good question. And could be a lot of reasons. Maybe it's already happened. Maybe they're brain dead and it's already happened. Maybe it doesn't happen in everybody. Maybe some people are zombies. I don't know. ICU nurses started doing this around the country, and it got to, as patients were dying, but they stopped doing it because if the family would start to look at this as a sign of, their loved one going on to heaven. And if it didn't happen, they were really upset.
Oh,
so
right.
They stopped doing it. Yeah. So why it doesn't happen, I don't know. I mean, the question is why it happens at all when it does happen. But it could be that. We don't really know. And but it also happens in animals. Somebody, Timo Borigian from University of Michigan, had a paper at the last Tucson conference on doing this in rats. And the same thing happened. They get this burst of high gamma. So does that mean rats have souls? Well, why wouldn't they? I mean, I don't know. If this is the soul, if this is the soul leaving the body. I can't say that that's what it is, but it certainly could be the neural correlate of the near-death experience, except that these people do die. But it does, this whole thing about near-death and out-of-body experiences is interesting. And about 15, 16 years ago, the first studies came out of from Ping Van Lommel in Netherlands and Peter Fenwick in England, and they studied, each of them, the separate studies, studied a couple hundred patients who had cardiac arrest, and they both found about 17% of them reported near-death or out-of-body experiences. And they're all very similar. They had the white light, the tunnel, the visiting dead relatives, sense of calm, the complete lack of panic. And when they came back, it kind of changed them for the good, generally speaking. So, and the BBC did a show about this, and on one patient in particular, a very famous case, she came back. I won't mention her name because she's passed on since, but she lived about 10 years after the event. It was a very famous case, and she remembered everything that was going on. And first, they thought it was lightness under anesthesia, but it couldn't have been because it happened while she was on hypothermic arrest and so forth. So it seemed a pretty bona fide case of near-death and out-of-body experience. And the BBC did a show about near-death and out-of-body, and particularly about her. And the show, the show is called "The Day I Died." And Eben Alexander's written, has written a lot about this.
Yeah.
Anyway, the BBC did a show, and they asked Peter Fenwick and Tim Van Lommel, well, how do you explain this? And they said, we have no idea. Why don't you ask Penrose and Hameroff, because they had that crazy idea. Excuse me a second, I have to have a drink.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry about that. Anyway, so BBC contacted me, and they said Roger didn't really want to comment. And I said, well, I've seen near-death. I know about this from medicine. And so I don't know for sure, but what could be happening is that at high frequencies, the blood stops flowing. Sorry, not at high frequencies. At the time of death, the blood stops flowing, and the oxygen is gone, and the microtubule quantum oscillations don't just terminate, but they dissipate to space-time geometry around them because they're happening in space-time geometry, even in the microtubules. But they remain entangled as something that might be called a quantum soul and could live, excuse me, I wouldn't say live, but exist at least temporarily out of the body. I need a drink. Hang on, please.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So Darren, it's interesting. I wanted to ask him as well about Alzheimer's because I think the microtubules are somehow involved with memory and disconnection in Alzheimer's.
Think so?
Yeah.
That's your theory?
No, I think that's what these guys say.
Oh.
Yeah, and then our guests have some questions. Not our guests.
Okay, sorry.
Listeners. Yeah,
I'm back.
So you were talking about the soul, the entangled quantum soul, really, right?
Well, what we're saying is that under normal circumstances, consciousness is happening in your brain and my brain at the level of the quantum underground and microtubules, which is really curvatures and deformation of the space-time geometry, which comprises the universe everywhere. But it gets organized and undergoes these quantum collapses, and in a certain way, in an orchestrated way, in the brain. But then when the brain is dying, these quantum oscillations, which occur in space, they shift to a higher frequency, even higher than what the brain can handle. They may do that anyway at various times, and just can exist in space-time geometry without the biology in a sort of non-local, distributed kind of way.
Oh, I see. Now I'm starting to get it.
but rather than dissipate and just kind of, like the second law of thermodynamics, they stay entangled as one entity.
Yeah.
And what you might call a quantum soul. That Roger doesn't like that term, and so I don't attribute it to him, but it's an idea that I've thought about. And I actually wrote a paper with Deepak Chopra about it, because he knows a lot about near-death not-about experiences, where we propose that these are actually entangled activities in fundamental space-time geometry that remain entangled and could exist indefinitely, or could go into another bunch of microtubules somewhere in reincarnation. And I think there's actually some pretty decent evidence from pediatrics for reincarnation of memories from past life or just other people's.
Yeah.
So.
Well, there's a lot of past life healing as well that happens. I mean, I know people that do past life healing, and they've been just healed by acknowledging past lives. I mean, there's a lot of evidence for all this stuff, NDEs and OBEs and reincarnation. Right. Yet they just don't want to look at it. They put it in this bucket over to the side for just to ignore.
That's true, and one of the main reasons is because they get ridiculed for being non-scientific, because the scientists. The materialist scientists just say, well, that's absurd. That's impossible. You just, this is pseudoscience. This is bullshit. That's what they say. But those same people that say that can't explain consciousness in the brain. So how can they say it can't occur out of the brain? It's totally hypocritical. When they explain consciousness in the brain, then they can say, it can't happen out of the brain. But until they do, I think it's a viable possibility. Now, I don't like to talk about it too much because, it takes away from my work in terms of, how anesthesia works and what consciousness actually is in the brain. But I do think, and I differ slightly with Roger about this, although he said the other day, I was with him in London, and he said the other day that he believed that the consciousness could go to another body in some sense. So that could be. But, to get there, we have to be in between somehow. But
How does your theory explain connecting to, for lack of a better term, like the Akashic records or just the ether? I mean, are the microtubules also as some sort of receiver? Like consciousness isn't just at the quantum underground of the brain, right? Do you think that it's also is it just moving around in superposition so that it can be accessed by the?
Well, I think as I said before, I think there is something like the Akashic record, and I think their consciousness is everywhere because it's like decoherence. It replaces decoherence. There's collapses happening everywhere all the time, in the table, in your clothes, in your body outside of the brain, everywhere. But generally, they're random and disconnected. And here's a metaphor for you. Okay, we call those proto-conscious. They're happening everywhere, but they don't amount to much. So if you go to the symphony and the orchestra is warming up, each musician is playing his instrument independent of the others. Not even listen to the other ones. They're all making different sounds. It's not music. It's noise. It's tone. You can think of each of those as a proto-conscious moment. And it's happening everywhere. It's like the background noise that just has some subjective component. Some of those may have pleasure. Some of them may have pain. Some of them may anything in between, but they cancel out and they don't amount to much. Now the orchestra begins to play, and you have Beethoven's Fifth, or you have a rock and roll classic, or whatever, and that's music. So what the brain does, what the microtubules do, is take all those random proto-conscious moments and orchestrate them, all those random objective reduction OR moments, and orchestrate them to give OR. We have orchestrated objective reduction. Now, one of the other things I didn't say about Roger's objective reduction, going back to his 1989 book, was that, and remember, he needed something outside the system that would explain consciousness. So if these collapses, when they do occur, to either this state or that state, were random, just like flipping a coin, which is what most people think. Copenhagen and decoherence are random.
Mm-hmm.
But the Born rule, Max Born, showing that the collapse the outcomes are random. that, who cares if they're just random. But what he said was that there's an influence from features intrinsic to the universe, what he called platonic values, from Plato's world of absolute form, that there was something intrinsic to the universe that had features and form and values and aesthetics and ethics and qualia, in other words, consciousness, but particularly ethical values and aesthetic values. So this would be the Akashic record that comes into play only at the moment of collapse. But the collapse is ubiquitous and everywhere. And the more orchestrated, the more organized these objective reduction moments are, the more the platonic values come into play. Now, one way to, if you want to take that in a religious sense, it's like divine guidance. If you're mindful and don't act rashly or reflexively, then you have those platonic values. These platonic values kick in, and you act in a ethical, aesthetic, honorable way. So
it could also be the flow state as well, like how we get into the zone or whatever.
Yeah, I think the zone is a matter of shifting to the higher frequency.
Right.
But whatever the frequency is occurring, whatever frequency you're operating at, it's due to collapses, and those collapses can be influenced by the platonic values. But I think what you're saying is you can shift in that way so the platonic values kind of take over, and that could be. But it's like following the way of the Tao or the divine guidance or
Christ consciousness, right, maybe, or yeah. So before we run out of time, I wanted to sort of ask you about the importance of this research as well. Like, there's the importance of it, spiritually, and the importance of it to sort of fight the dogmatic materialist. But then there's also, you guys are finding connections to Alzheimer's and memories and stuff like that too. And then have you also come across during your research like synesthesia, where people have their senses all mixed up, or like locked up syndrome or other disorders that you've been able to identify the microtubules playing a role?
Well, let me just stick to Alzheimer's for the time being, and also brain trauma. So in Alzheimer's, you have two different types of lesions. You have the amyloid plaques, which are these big globs of crap outside the neuron, but they don't seem to cause that much problem. But then you have the neurofibrillary tangles inside the neuron, and what those are so you have microtubules that have microtubule-associated proteins, various types of them, and these maps, they're kind of like apps to a cell phone. We all have microtubules. We all have the same cell phone, but you have different apps than I do, so you do different things, and I do different things. So the maps do different things. Now, one of the maps that's kind of an essential map is called tau. And tau does a couple things. It kind of binds the microtubules together and stabilizes them, and it also acts as a traffic signal for motor proteins. So if you're going to regulate a synapse, the material is formed in the cell body and transported along the microtubule by these motor proteins, which literally run along the microtubule. It's amazing if you've ever seen a video of this. And then, and in dendrites, the microtubules are disrupted in mixed polarities, so these motor proteins carrying a cargo to a specific synapse may have to jump from microtubule to microtubule and then come to a branch point, decide whether they go right and left, the dendritic branching. And then finally deliver their cargo, and it's the tau protein that causes them to deliver their cargo to a particular area. So they're like traffic signals. So what happens in Alzheimer's disease is that the tau falls off the microtubules, and the microtubules disintegrate. They depolymerize, and you get clumps of this tau protein that are called neurofibrillary tangles in the neuron, and then the microtubules are gone, the neuron shortens, and you lose synapses. So it's a loss of the tau, the microtubules, and eventually synapses and neurons that are associated with the cognitive defect in Alzheimer's disease. Now, how we got interested in this is that when Audubon showed that the microtubules have all these resonances, it occurred to me that we ought to be able to interface with them using some of these frequencies, if they're the resonant frequencies. Mm-hmm. And infrared or the terahertz is close to infrared, and a lot of people are putting infrared into the brain now, and actually showing interesting results.
Yep.
Then you have gigahertz, which is microwaves, and some people have tried that. No, thank you. And then next is megahertz. And megahertz is radio frequency waves. No, thank you there also. However, when I was looking at this, megahertz is also, in mechanical vibrations, is ultrasound. And ultrasound has been used safely in medicine for 100 years. It passes through the body, reflects, echoes off surfaces, and you get an image. And so I wondered if anybody has tried, and at that point when I first read this in 2012 or so, people have been doing transcranial direct current stimulation in the brain, transcranial magnetic stimulation, different ways to affect brain function by putting, and now photons into the brain. I wondered if anybody had been putting ultrasound in, because it seemed that ultrasound's been around. And sure enough, this guy, Jamie Tyler at ASU, had been doing it. And he's in animals, finding behavioral and physiological effects. And I said, and it proposed that it could be used for cognitive function and so forth. So I got in touch with him, and we became friends. And eventually, I wound up suggesting to my anesthesia colleagues that we have ultrasound machines in the OR. We use them all the time for imaging to put in lines and so forth. So we're quite familiar. And I said, we should try this on our chronic pain patients who are depressed. And they said to me, Hammer, that's my kind of nickname in the operating room. It's your idea. You got to shave. It's your idea. You got to shave, Ted. You go first. And I thought about it, and I looked up. I said, this has been used on newborns to look for bleeds, and it doesn't seem to harm them. It's been approved for brain imaging, but was forgotten about after CT and MRI. I said it's been put in the brain. I said, well, what the hell? So in front of my friends sitting around in the anesthesia library one afternoon at the end of the day, I said, okay. So I put the gel on and put it to my head and held it there for about, 15 seconds. I didn't want to do it too long. I didn't feel a thing. And I said, okay, I put it down. Well, that's too bad. But about a minute later, I got like a buzz, and I was highly energized and very creative and felt really good for about an hour. And so we eventually did a study in early 2013, published the first study of ultrasound, transcranial ultrasound, which I named TUS after the airport code for Tucson, showing effects on mental states, improved mood in depressed patients. And since then, there have been a couple studies from Australia showing ultrasound improves symptoms and pathology in Alzheimer's in rats. And we're gearing up to do a study on Alzheimer's patients. We did a pilot study over the summer with interesting results. And we're going to look at developmental delay in kids also, and also brain trauma. So stay tuned to that. We'll see how it goes. Meanwhile, they're pouring, all these drug studies on the amyloid drugs don't work.
Yeah, I thought they were doing some other research on Alzheimer's too with light. What was it? Was it light waves or light?
Infrared photons. Yeah.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, infrared. We're going to have a session at the Conscious Conference in Shanghai on with one guy on photons, one guy on transcranial magnetic, one guy on electrical, and one guy on ultrasound.
Wow, and that's going to be at the conference? One guy on mushrooms.
Not in China.
Oh, wow.
Anyway,
yeah.
If we're running out of time, let me finish up on one thing.
Yeah,
I started talking about evolution before. So I wrote this chapter. Everybody thinks I'm crazy. In fact, Dave Chalmers said, people hate your quantum consciousness ideas. They're going to absolutely detest your quantum evolution ideas. I said, well, Dave, I'm going to do it anyway. So imagine these objective reductions, random proto-conscious moments are happening everywhere. And if so, they would be there before life started. Now, everybody says, I said before, that life formed, evolved, and then consciousness happened. There's consciousness, and that all this happens because of survival of the fittest, survival of gene survival. The selfish gene idea of Dawkins.
Yeah.
To me, that makes no sense. I mean, why would an animal give a shit about anything, do anything, without feeling?
Except for pleasure, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, why does a rat do anything in an experiment? For reward, right? Why do we do anything? For reward. not always hedonistic reward, pleasure, but also altruism, spiritual bliss, love. It feels better to give than to receive. But pleasure and avoiding pain is the origin of our behavior, and all behavior, I would argue. So, if consciousness, if pleasure, so let's go back to these little proto-conscious moments. Some of them are going to be pleasurable. So how did life evolve? How did life form? So there's this idea of the primordial soup that was put out by Haldane and Opperin in the 20s. The idea that life started in this mixture of chemicals with lightning. And these guys in the 50s, Harold Urey and Stanley Miller, reproduced the primordial soup in a lab. And they put all the ingredients they knew were there. They put sparks in for lightning. And at the end, they looked, and what they found was organic molecules, and specifically amphipathic molecules. Remember, we were talking about benzene before, the aromatic ring with the pi resonance cloud, the lollipop of quantum stuff, of which dopamine is a good example. They found exactly dopamine-like molecules, amphipathic, meaning nonpolar at one end and then a polar tail on the other. Now, and then Opperin went on to Opperin, who started the primordial soup idea, showed that these nonpolar groups, the oil-like ends of the lollipops, would get together in the middle, and the polar ends would stick out in what he called a micelle. Actually, soap bubbles are very much like that, or soap molecules are very much. That's how they clean your soap. The oil binds the inner stuff and it makes it soluble, and you wash it away. But he said that was the origin of life, and that led to actual cells and biological living cells, and that's how proteins form, as I said before. So inside proteins are these nonpolar pi resonance clouds where water is excluded. They're called hydrophobic pockets in proteins, and that is exactly where anesthetics act, in hydrophobic pockets of protein. Now, which protein is another story, but it's in microtubules. These nonpolar hydrophobic pockets connect to the tubulin and they form these helical pathways throughout the whole microtubule. So it gets very, very geometric and complicated and interesting. But you get the same quantum underground in lipid membranes and in nucleic acids. So in all forms of biomolecules, the interior is conducive to quantum effects. Anyway, it occurred to me that back in the primordial soup, that these micelles would start to get larger and larger, and the quantum resonances among the pi groups would get more complex, and you'd start having these organized objective reductions, and some of them were going to be pleasurable, and that would be a feedback fitness function to cause the pi resonance, the actual molecules, their orientation to be optimal to maximize pleasure. In other words, the pleasure from these coalescence of dopamine-like pleasure molecules would arrange themselves to optimize pleasure, and that these micelles and other organizations would get more and more complicated and grow and differentiate and evolve just to optimize pleasure. And of course, along the way, they had to survive. They had to fight. They had to flee. They had to fight. They had to do whatever to survive so that they would optimize feeling good. So in other words, feeling good, life evolved to feel good. And the brain evolved to feel good, not for complexity, but and consciousness didn't emerge after a long time. Consciousness was there all along, and consciousness sparked the origin of life. And feelings drove its evolution and are still driving its evolution. Everything we do pretty much is to feel good one way or the other. So that's out there. So many people are investing in evolution that they don't like it, but they ignore consciousness. But that's what I think about that anyway.
Yeah.
What do you think about wolfins?
We're all what?
Sorry, no, we won't get into that.
What did you say?
I was talking with a friend a couple weeks ago about a wolfin-like creature that dolphins and wolves came from.
Wolves?
Yes.
Okay, maybe. I don't know. But I think, wolves and dolphins have microtubules. In fact, all animals have microtubules, and plants have microtubules, and even prokaryotes and archaeobacterium have something very, very, very much like microtubules. So I think microtubules came along to optimize pleasure because they respond to just about every form of energy: ultraviolet, infrared, thermal, white noise. They turn it into coherence. Anirban Bandyopadhyay has a new paper about that, about how microtubules turn noise into music, or noise into life or consciousness, or whatever you want to say.
Wow.
So, so I think that's where it's all coming from.
Do plants have equal amount or more or less, or?
What's that?
Do plants have an equal amount or more or less?
Fewer, like 1 microtubule per cell.
Huh.
And what do we have? We had like 96 billion.
If you count the individual tubulins, we have a billion per neuron.
And 96 billion neurons?
86, yeah.
80. Yeah. So does that mean that we have to get our computer calculations to do 86 billion times 86 billion calculations, and then we're okay?
Well, if you want to look at the brute force calculation, it would be 10 to the 16th operations times the number of neurons, which is 10 to the 27th. So that's the number of calculations, if that's all it were. But I would argue that wouldn't do squat, because in terms of consciousness, because you need collapse. And so I think the more you have, the faster you can reach critical threshold. You know that movie Lucy, where she's only using a small fraction of her brain, and Morgan Freeman, and she used more and more, and she kind of got all these superpowers.
Yeah.
And people say we only use a small fraction of our brain. I don't think that's true. I think actually, so let me go back a little bit. I was saying before that Roger and I first suggested that we had to maintain coherence for 25 milliseconds to account for gamma synchrony EEG 40 hertz oscillations. In our recent papers in 2014 and 2016, we took a different approach, because since we now know about the megahertz oscillation, the faster vibrations in microtubules, and since the microtubules in dendrites, particularly in pyramidal cells, which give rise to EEG, are interrupted and of mixed polarities. So you have one microtubule next to another going in opposite directions, which means that if they're both resonating, they're going to have slightly different frequencies, and they're going to have beat frequencies. They're going to give these harmonics, these negative harmonics that will cascade to give EEG. So it occurred to us that if the orco-R moments are happening not at 25 milliseconds, but at 10 megahertz, which is millionths of a second, it's a lot easier to avoid decoherence. It made our argument from the physics standpoint much, much, much easier, because you only have to avoid decoherence for a millionth of a second instead of a 40th of a second, and maybe even less if you want to go to the gigahertz. So it made that argument very easy, and it explained how EEG could be beat frequencies of microtubules. So the faster you go, the deeper you go, and the more conscious you are, I would say.
So how does this affect us, like regular day-to-day people and spiritually, the importance of this research and this sort of theory as opposed to our materialistic one?
Well, I think if you meditate or pray or become one with the universe, or whatever state does it for, whatever you want to call it, flow state, I think you're shifting to a higher frequency, and you're more involving space-time geometry and less of the material world. So you're going deeper into the quantum world, deeper into space-time geometry. And, space-time geometry itself is it seems to be fractal at multiple frequencies. And, if you go down in scale from atoms or quarks or whatever, go down and down and down, eventually you reach the Planck scale, 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, which seems to be the bottom line, where there is information. And how that information gets upward is not understood. But it could be kind of like a fractal, repeating every three orders of magnitude or so. And it could be that as we go deeper into the state, as we meditate or go further that way, we go deeper into this quantum state, into space-time geometry, and less in the material world. And this would account for, as I said before, yogis who their metabolism slow down or they don't appear to be there, but they're actually deeply conscious, or the people in the MRI scanner and the psilocybin whose outwardly their brains look like they're on vacation, but actually they're highly conscious because their consciousness has gone to a deeper level. So I think when you meditate or become one with the universe, however you do it, you're quite literally doing that. You're going into this deeper level and shifting more into towards the Planck scale.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's so nice to hear it in that scientific term, right? In that scientific way. Like it does, it seems to me like it's easier to grasp now if there's some theories behind it. So,
well, I think, don't be bullied. And I just give you you can't be bullied by these scientists and materialists who have these haughty attitudes that, just ask them, well, how do you explain consciousness in the brain? If they say, well, it's an emergent property, what's the evidence for that? How would you even test it? And basically, it's bullshit. And you're doing all this brain mapping, and you can't, and yet you've got a worm. You map the entire brain of the worm, it doesn't do anything. And you got paramecium, which is one bit according to you, and it's more clever than a lot of people I know. So I think these guys are blowing smoke, and they're making billions out of this brain mapping, which is a boondoggle, and
Well, there might be maybe there'll be other uses for that brain mapping. I mean, I don't know.
It could be. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. But in terms of, the essence, finding the essence of the brain, I mean, they're only looking skin deep. They're only looking at the neuronal level. They're not looking, it'd be like a doctor being only a dermatologist and not knowing anything about the heart or the lungs or your spinal cord or your brain, for that matter.
Yeah,
that's what they're doing. They're looking strictly at the membrane and the synapse and then going, what's going on? I mean, how do they know the microtubules aren't involved? They go, and there's actually good evidence for it. And maybe this is the last thing I should say. Anesthesia has been a big mystery and something how it works. And we know that the potency of the gas anesthetics correlate with its solubility in this pi resonance quantum underground in proteins. The question is which proteins? And it was always thought that it was membrane proteins like receptors for serotonin, acetylcholine, glycine, or GABA, an inhibitory protein. And yet effects on those proteins are all over the place. They go up, they go down. There's no consistency. Anyway, about 10 years ago, a guy at University of Pennsylvania, Rod Eckenhoff, started doing this systematically. And he found that anesthesia binds to 74 different proteins in a neuron, about half in the membrane, half in the cytoplasm, including microtubules, including tubulin. He then did genomic and proteomic work that showed that the functional effect was on tubulin, on microtubules. And he then did a subsequent study where he showed with a fluorescent anesthetic that the action of anesthetics is on microtubules, pretty in tadpoles. But anesthesia works on all animals, so I think the evidence actually points to microtubules. Now, people are ignoring it because they're hung up on this membrane protein idea, but there's no evidence. So I think, at least I think the evidence now points to, and will continue to point to in the future, anesthesia acting in the quantum underground of microtubules. We have a paper on that out on that. We're working on a couple more, so stay tuned to that one too.
Yeah, nice. So are you speaking anywhere coming up in any conferences, and then you also have your regular conference that you guys do, that's going to be in China, hopefully this year, right?
Yeah, I just got back from Europe and spoke at the Pasteur Institute in Paris, and attended the announcement and the launch of the Roger Penrose Institute in London with James Tagg and Betsy Bigby and Roger Penrose. And it was quite a thrill. And the press release just went out. I'll send you the press release. And we're looking forward to that. And China, and then after that, who knows? Lots of other stuff.
Yeah. But
mostly right now, I'm excited about the Penrose Institute and getting that going. That'll be really exciting. And we hope to repeat. We hope to do Honorbaum's work over there, look at the quantum resonances and microtubules. It's kind of there's all kinds of institutes following the AI brain mapping idea. And they have a lot of money. The Paul Allen Institute, where Christoph Koch works, has ridiculous amounts of money, map the mouse cortex. And, you know, like you said, they're finding all kinds of interesting things, but in the end, as far as, you know, it's just skin deep. They're not going to find consciousness. I mean, I could be wrong, but, you know, well, let's wait and find out. And all kinds of other ones, institutes based on this idea, Salk and Scripps and here and there everywhere. But, and there's a lot of money behind it. And the Penrose Institute is kind of the antidote to all those, because they're all following the same party line. Brain is a computer, neurons are switches, bits. We get enough computer power, we'll have the brain. I say bullshit. And we need new ideas, and those new ideas have emanated mostly from Roger Penrose beginning in 1989, not only in consciousness, but also in cosmology, in the origin of the universe. He thinks that the Big Bang was preceded by another eon, which was preceded by another one. It could be that the universe is actually evolving, Big Bang to Big Bang, emerging general relativity, using sensors to detect gravity waves. Yvette Fuentes is a physicist who'll be in the Institute, and she's developing Bose-Einstein condensates to detect gravity waves, which could be used to probe the universe, look for dark matter, and also look in the Earth's crust to look for earthquakes, to predict earthquakes. So there's lots of possible spin-offs, and we hope to develop those based on Roger's ideas. And they all go against the grain of mainstream physics and mainstream neuroscience and mainstream philosophy. But all those things have really failed to answer the deep questions. And he has. He's a courageous thinker, and he has developed these ideas. And I'll send you the press release, and hopefully you'll send it to your listeners.
Yeah, for sure we will. Yeah.
So it's an exciting time.
Yeah, good luck with all that, the Penrose Institute, and we'll check back in and see how it's going. And we definitely want to thank you for all your time you spent here today. It was fascinating. My mind is blown.
All right, Graham, Darren, nice talking to you guys.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thanks for coming along.
You're very welcome. And stay in touch, and catch you later.
Okay, buddy.
Down the road.
Okay, thanks.
Take it easy.
Okay, bye-bye.
And that was our chat with the one and only Stuart Hameroff. You know what's funny is what the bleep to me, we knew. I remember watching that like fucking way before I was into any of this shit.
Yeah. Was it a seed?
Chick, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I remember that.
Was it a seed planted?
Yeah, maybe. I remember it stuck with me for sure.
Yeah, I think I saw it with my sister.
Back then, like, I don't even think I had a computer yet, you know? Like, we rented it at the video store. Yeah. And, like, I don't think if I had a computer and internet at that time, it was pretty, you know, I wasn't doing much with it.
I saw it in the theater.
Online dating.
I saw it in the theater.
Did you?
Yeah.
What sort of theater?
Just movie theater.
Just a regular one?
Yeah, pretty much.
You were in a hipster then.
What are you saying? No, I've never been a hipster.
Yeah, big thanks to Stuart for coming on the show.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, it's always good when you only ask like 4 questions in the span of 2 hours and just get to sit there with your jaw on the table. Yeah,
I wanted to get a little bit more into the motions and how that helps. When I was researching his work, it seemed to be that that was a key point. But
usually best not to interrupt. Yeah, in my experience.
Yeah.
So, and big thanks to Stuart. Big thanks to you guys. Of course, our subscribers. We've got a few more. We could always use more and more of those to help us keep having these chats with no commercials, no bullshit. Stuart can come on here and just go for 2 hours. No commercials. We don't have to stop him. We don't have to break up his thoughts.
Yeah, exactly.
And it kind of lets us keep going with that style where we don't have to cram questions in and we can just let these guys go. So big thanks to our supporters who let us do that. Check out grimerica.ca/support for all the different ways you can do that. There's a bunch of different monthly options there. You can start at $1 and, you know, kind of work your way up as you go. And if you can't support monetarily, of course, there's, 20 other ways.
Yep. You can connect with us too through Instagram and Twitter and Google Hangouts. Do you want to explain that?
I think we'll get into that in the intro.
Okay.
Like by the time this comes out, we'll have gotten into that.
Okay.
So all the link by now the link for the Google Hangouts should be in the show notes.
Okay.
Which so far is pretty cool. Like say, Graham and I won't always be in there. We'll check in from time to time. And eventually it'd be cool to have, a few hundred members so that it's like, you could be sitting in an airport and just sort of pop in there and there'll be a couple other, you shoot out a message and there's a couple other bored Grimericans that'll entertain each other.
Yeah, we'll have to explain that a little bit more.
Network and all that fun stuff.
Because what you're talking about is an app on the phone, right? Like a chat app?
That's right.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, so big thanks, Stuart. Big thanks to you guys. Hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. And thanks for listening, guys. We will see you next week.
Sense of the world only if we base the world on consciousness. World is made of consciousness. World is consciousness. Consciousness is the sense of the world only if we base the world on consciousness. World is made of consciousness. World is consciousness. Consciousness is the sense of the world only if we base the world on consciousness. World is made of consciousness. World is consciousness. Consciousness is the sense of the world only if we base the world on consciousness.
There is no matter as such. You look out. Expand that consciousness. Consciousness, creativity in the brain. Awareness. Expand that consciousness. Consciousness. World is made of consciousness. World is consciousness. Consciousness can make sense of the world only if we base the world on consciousness. World is made of consciousness. World is consciousness. Consciousness is the ground of it. Make sense of the world only if we base the world on consciousness. World is made of consciousness. World is consciousness.
If they make you laugh, if they make you cry, if they blow your mind, why not go online to Grimerica?